For most of Earth's history, life did not rush forward. It waited in darkness, in water, in forms so small they left almost no faces behind. 3 billion years passed, and the planet seemed to keep its greatest possibilities locked away. Then, in a narrow window of deep time, bodies with eyes, mouths, shells, legs, and instincts began to appear. Why did life remain almost silent for so long, and then seem to become animal all at once? For 3 billion years, why did nothing evolve? Then every animal on Earth appeared at once. Long before there were forests, bones, wings, or footsteps, Earth was already old. Its oceans moved under a sky no animal had ever seen. Waves broke against volcanic shores, minerals settled into dark basins, and the planet changed beneath a sun that looked familiar, though the world below it would not. If a human mind could stand there, it might feel life had not yet begun. There would be no eyes watching back, no mouths opening in water, no shells scattered in the sand, no tracks crossing mud. Yet this silence would be misleading. The planet was not empty. It was only living in a way that human senses are poorly built to notice. The earliest life did not announce itself with bodies. It left chemical traces, layered mats, microscopic remains, and patterns in ancient stone. These were not animals waiting to become interesting. They were living systems already engaged in the long work every later body would depend on. The strange difficulty is that most of this work happened below the level of shape. A cell can change the future of a planet without leaving a face behind. A microbial community can alter water, air, and rock without producing anything that looks like a creature from a modern sea. For billions of years, evolution was not absent. It was small, patient, and almost invisible. This is why the title feels like a paradox. It seems to say that nothing evolved for 3 billion years, and then animal life suddenly arrived. But the deeper question is not whether evolution stopped. It did not. The deeper question is why the first long ages of life produced so few bodies that we can easily recognize, and why, much later, in rocks from the early Cambrian world, animal forms appear with unusual clarity. That difference matters, because the human story begins far earlier than humans. It begins before mammals, before backbones, before eyes with lenses, before nerves arranged into brains. It begins in the slow establishment of conditions that made bodies possible at all. The body listening now, breathing quietly, is built from solutions that were not invented in a single moment. Every cell in it belongs to a history older than any landscape known to people. Every breath depends on a planet, changed by life before animals existed. When we look backward from the human body to the first animal bodies, we are not looking at a straight road. We are looking through broken windows in stone. Some windows are clear. Many are missing. Soft things decay. Tiny things vanish. Seafloors are buried, folded, heated, and erased. Even when life was present, the record could remain nearly silent. This makes the ancient world look still, not because nothing happened, but because so much happened in forms that stone does not easily remember. A shell can become a fossil more readily than a soft skin. A burrow can survive where a body disappears. A mineralized spine can speak louder than a whole community of delicate organisms. So the apparent stillness before the Cambrian is partly a problem of evidence. It is also scale. Human beings are drawn to visible movement, to eyes, jaws, limbs, and struggle. We notice animals because animals resemble the kind of life we are. Microbial life does not offer the same mirror. It asks us to imagine life without expression, without posture, without behavior that looks familiar. Yet from that quiet beginning came the chemistry that later allowed muscles to contract, nerves to signal, guts to digest, and senses to map the world. Before the animal world could become visible, Earth had to become a place where larger bodies could live. The first question, then, is not why life suddenly became dramatic. It is why the oldest foundations of animal life were laid so deeply before the stones began to show us anything that looked like a distant ancestor. The silence of the oldest Earth is partly a silence made by distance. When we look at a modern animal, even a very simple one, we see a body arranged for the visible world. There may be a front end that meets food first, a surface that senses touch or light, an inside that separates nourishment from waste, and a way of moving through water or across the seafloor. These features feel natural to us because we live inside a body built from the same broad animal inheritance. But the earliest life did not need to solve those problems in that way. A microbe did not need eyes to remain alive. It did not need bones, teeth, muscles, or a head. It only needed to keep a boundary between itself and the outside, gather energy, copy itself, and pass small changes into the future. From the view of a human observer, that can look almost like nothing. From the view of life itself, it was everything. The problem is that the fossil record is not equally kind to all forms of existence. A large animal body can leave impressions, shells, tubes, tracks, or burrows. A microbial world usually leaves more subtle signs, chemical balances, layered structures, mineral textures, and traces that require careful interpretation. This means the first long ages of life are not written like a book of creatures. They are written more like a faint pressure left in stone. When people say nothing evolved for billions of years, they are often speaking from the frustration of not seeing familiar bodies. The rocks do not show herds, fins, faces, or predators. They show long intervals where life seems to be present, but visually restrained. Yet during that restraint, important changes could accumulate in ways that did not produce obvious shapes. Metabolism could diversify. Cells could adapt to light, heat, minerals, and changing oceans. Some organisms could learn to use energy more efficiently. Others could alter their surroundings so deeply that the planet itself began to change. This matters for the later origin of animals, and eventually for the distant origin of humans, because human life is not built only from organs. It is built from cellular habits that began far earlier: the control of membranes, the reading of genetic instructions, the capture and release of energy, the repair of damage, and the ability of living matter to remain organized against decay. Before a nervous system could send a signal, cells had to manage chemistry. Before a muscle could move, cells had to use energy in controlled ways. Before a human brain could hold memory, life had to preserve information across generations. These foundations do not look dramatic in stone, but without them, no later animal drama could have existed. The ancient Earth, therefore, asks us to slow down our idea of progress. Evolution does not always announce itself by creating a new kind of body. Sometimes it works by making life more stable, more flexible, or more capable of surviving in a changing world. For a very long time, the most important events may have been too small to see without instruments, too soft to fossilize clearly, or too gradual to appear as a sudden change in the record. The seafloor may have carried living films where no footprint remained. Shallow waters may have held communities whose influence was chemical rather than visual. Generations could rise and vanish in numbers beyond imagination, each one adding tiny variations to the long memory of life. The stones later available to us preserve only fragments of that immense activity. They give us enough to know that life was present, but not enough to make the world feel crowded with creatures. That is why the apparent emptiness before the Cambrian must be treated with care. It is not an empty stage waiting for animals to arrive. It is a hidden workshop in which the basic tools of life were being tested, copied, altered, and preserved. The animal body would come later, but it did not come from nowhere. The great difficulty is that animal life did not appear on a planet that had been waiting passively. It appeared on a planet shaped by living chemistry, by oceans that had changed, by air that was not always breathable, and by rocks that carried marks of earlier organisms for immense spans of time. To understand why the first clear animal bodies matter so much, it helps to imagine a question hidden under the title. What had to be prepared before an animal could have a body at all? A body is not only a shape, it is an agreement between cells. It is a way of holding energy, dividing labor, protecting an inside, sensing an outside, and passing instructions to descendants without losing the pattern completely. None of these tasks is simple. A creature with a mouth depends on cells that know how to form surfaces and openings. A creature that moves depends on cells that can coordinate forces. A creature that senses light depends on molecules able to respond to the environment and pass that response inward. Long before anything like a human hand, a human eye, or a human memory existed, Life had to solve quieter problems that made such later features possible. This is where the apparent stillness of deep time becomes more meaningful. The world before the visible rise of animals was not failing to evolve. It was building capacities that did not yet look like animals. Some changes may have concerned the inner machinery of cells. Some may have involved relationships between organisms and their surroundings. Some may have depended on the chemistry of oceans, oxygen, or the slow recycling of minerals through Earth's crust. Each condition would matter later, but no single condition should be treated as a magic switch. Science is careful here because ancient causes rarely stand alone. The Cambrian world did not open because one door turned. It opened, as far as evidence suggests, after many locks had been loosening for a very long time. For the human story, this is an important correction. People often imagine ancestry as a chain of creatures becoming more like us. But the deeper origin of the human body lies in arrangements far older than anything human. Cells cooperating, tissues forming boundaries, bodies learning direction, generations preserving useful variation. The first animals were not small people in disguise. They were experiments in being many-celled, in moving through water, in eating, avoiding, attaching, sensing, and leaving traces. Most of what mattered then had nothing to do with human thought, yet without those old biological arrangements, no later brain could ask why they happened. The question therefore widens. Why did these arrangements take so long to become visible? Perhaps part of the answer lies in preservation. Soft bodies vanish easily. Tiny bodies vanish almost completely. A world full of microscopic life can leave a delicate record that later observers mistake for emptiness. Another part may lie in ecology. An animal body is costly. It must be fed, repaired, protected, and reproduced. Larger size, movement, and complex tissues require energy and coordination. Another part may lie in interaction. Once organisms begin to push, graze, hide, chase, and defend, life can change in ways that stone can record. Shells, burrows, scratch marks, and hardened surfaces are signs that life was meeting life in new ways. Still, caution matters. It would be too simple to say that nothing happened, then everything happened. The more honest image is slower and stranger. For billions of years, Earth carried life below the threshold of familiar form. Then, after long preparation, many animal designs became visible in a brief interval of geological time. What looks sudden to us may be the moment when hidden preparation crossed into evidence. The stones do not show a single birth of all animals. They show a change in what life could build, and in what Earth could preserve. Before animals had bodies that could be drawn, life existed as something far quieter than a creature. It lived as cells, thin boundaries of living chemistry held apart from the sea around them. A cell was not simple in the way a stone is simple. It was small, but it was organized. It had to keep some substances inside and others outside. It had to gather energy without burning itself apart. It had to copy information, repair damage, and continue through generations that passed too quickly and too silently for any human eye to follow. In that ancient ocean, life did not need a face. It did not need a skeleton. It did not need fear, hunger, or intention in the animal sense. It only needed to remain alive long enough for variation to be tested by the world. This kind of existence can feel almost invisible when placed beside the later drama of shells, teeth, eyes, and movement. Yet the quiet cell is the first deep foundation beneath every animal body, including the human one. The cells in a human brain are not the same as early microbes, but they still depend on principles that reach back into that older world. Membranes, energy flow, chemical signals, inherited instructions, and the careful separation between inside and outside. Long before thought, there was boundary. Long before memory, there was information copied from one generation to the next. Long before movement through a landscape, there was a living surface responding to water, minerals, heat, and light. The ancient microbial world was not a waiting room for animals. It was a vast living experiment in how matter could hold order against time. Some organisms found energy from sunlight. Others lived through chemical reactions in darker places. Some formed thin films across surfaces. Others built layered structures in shallow water. slowly trapping sediment and minerals. These lives did not leave the kind of fossils that make a viewer stop and recognize a familiar body. They left quieter evidence, often difficult to read and easy to underestimate. If the later Cambrian seas look crowded and inventive, the older microbial seas look restrained because their inventions were mostly internal, chemical, and ecological. They changed the world without looking like the world of animals. This matters for the central question because evolution was already working, but not yet in the language of limbs and organs. Natural selection does not require a nervous system. It only requires variation, inheritance, and a world that favors some outcomes over others. A microbe that used energy a little more efficiently could leave more descendants. A cell that repaired damage better could persist. A community that survived a change in temperature, minerals, or light could continue while another faded. Over immense time, these small differences could reshape oceans and atmosphere. They could also build the biological habits that later made multicellular life possible. To a human listener, 3 billion years can sound like an unbearable delay. But to life, delay is not the right word. There was no plan moving toward animals, and certainly no plan moving toward people. There were only generations, environments, accidents, limits, and survivals. The origin of the human body lies not in a sudden decision by nature, but in this older patience. Every breath taken by a person belongs to a planetary story in which tiny organisms altered the conditions for later life. Every cell in the body carries the inheritance of ancient solutions to energy, boundary, and reproduction. The mystery is not that nothing happened for so long. The mystery is that so much happened without producing many bodies large enough, hard enough, or familiar enough for stone to remember clearly. The first life did not have to look like us to become our beginning. It only had to continue, to divide, to change slightly, and to leave behind a world in which more complex bodies could one day become possible, visible, and fragile. A living cell begins with a quiet separation. Inside its boundary, chemistry can be held in a certain order. Outside, the ocean remains vast, changing, and indifferent. This boundary, the membrane, may seem modest compared with an eye or a limb, but without it there is no organism at all. A membrane allows life to make a small private world inside the larger world. It lets some molecules pass, keeps others out, and gives the cell a place where reactions can be repeated with enough stability to matter. In the ancient sea, such boundaries were among the deepest inventions of life. They did not create animals, but they made animal bodies imaginable in the far future. Every human cell still lives by this old principle. It has an inside that must be protected, a surface that must communicate, and a flow of materials that must be controlled. Before any creature could crawl, swim, or sense danger, living matter had to learn how to hold itself together. Energy was the next quiet problem. Life cannot remain organized without power. Early cells found different ways to draw energy from sunlight, minerals, and chemical gradients. These processes were not dramatic in appearance, but they shaped what life could become. A body with tissues requires more energy than a thin film of microbes. A moving animal requires more energy than a passive cell. A nervous system requires constant energy to send signals and maintain order. The deep history of animals, therefore, begins with the much older history of how cells captured, stored, and spent energy. The human brain, which uses energy even in sleep, depends on solutions that began long before brains existed. In this sense, the sleeping listener is still tied to the first problem of life: how to keep order alive in a world that tends to scatter it. Reproduction added another layer to the story. A cell that cannot copy itself leaves no long future, but copying is never perfect forever. Small errors, rearrangements, and variations can enter the next generation. Most changes may be neutral or harmful. A few can help in a particular environment. Over countless generations, this is enough for evolution to work. There does not need to be ambition. There does not need to be direction. Life changes because inheritance is stable enough to continue, yet imperfect enough to vary. This balance is one of the oldest foundations under the later animal world. Too much disorder, and life collapses. Too much sameness, and life cannot adapt. The long ages before visible animals were shaped by this tension between preservation and change. The fossil record cannot show most of these events directly. It rarely preserves the moment when one cell copied information with a slight difference. It rarely preserves a new metabolic pathway as a clear shape in stone. The evidence is more indirect, found in chemistry, rocks, genetic comparisons, and the broad patterns of life that survived. This is why the old Earth can look motionless from far away. The most important changes were often not changes in outline, but changes in capacity. Cells became better at managing energy. They interacted with one another. They responded to light, minerals, and other living things. Some lineages vanished completely. Others left descendants whose internal machinery would later support larger forms. When animals finally became visible in the Cambrian record, they carried these older capacities inside them. Their bodies were new in appearance, but their life processes were ancient. A shell, a gut, or a nerve could only exist because cells already knew how to separate, fuel, copy, signal, and repair. The animal world did not begin from emptiness. It rose from a microbial history so long that the human mind mistakes it for stillness. The origin of people is therefore not only in bones or footprints, but in these first cellular rules written before the world had a face. The distance between a microbe and a human mind is so large that it can feel almost impossible to cross in thought. One is a small living cell without eyes, bones, memory, or sleep. The other is a body that can listen in the dark, remember childhood, imagine ancient oceans, and ask why life took so long to become visible. Yet the bridge between them is not made of sudden miracles. It is made of older biological rules repeated and reshaped over deep time before a brain could think. Living cells had to preserve information. Before a memory could form, molecules had to carry patterns from one generation to the next. Before a nervous system could coordinate a body, cells had to send and receive signals. The human story, when followed far enough backward, does not begin with a skull or a tool. It begins with the basic ability of life to hold a pattern and pass it forward. This is one reason the long microbial age matters so deeply. It was not a blank preface to animal life. It was the age in which the smallest foundations of all later bodies became dependable. A human body is not merely a large object made of cells. It is a society of cells that must cooperate every moment. Some cells carry oxygen. Some protect surfaces. Some sense light. Some build bone. Some send signals across the nervous system. This cooperation would be impossible if cells had not learned, in much older forms, how to communicate, attach, divide, and respond to their surroundings. The first microbes were not tiny versions of animals, but they carried the beginning of problems that animals would later solve in larger and more organized ways. How does life know what belongs inside and outside? How does it use energy without destroying itself? How does it copy instructions without losing all stability? How does it respond to danger without a mind? These questions were being answered long before the seafloor held creatures with mouths or limbs. The slow answers did not look like progress to human eyes, because they did not immediately produce familiar shapes. But they made progress possible in the only sense evolution knows. Some forms survived, some changed, some disappeared, and some left descendants able to face new conditions. This is why the apparent delay before animals should not be treated as wasted time. It was time spent under limits. A single cell can live with few needs compared with a large animal. A multicellular body must solve many difficulties at once. Its cells must remain together without all doing the same thing. They must divide labor without falling into disorder. They must protect the body while allowing exchange with the outside world. They must reproduce in a way that preserves the whole design, not just one cell's survival. Later, when animals became more visible in the fossil record, they were not simply larger microbes. They were new arrangements built from old living capacities. For the distant origin of humans, this means our deepest inheritance is not only anatomical, it is cellular. The body that breathes, heals, digests, senses, and sleeps still depends on processes older than any animal face. Even human memory, so personal and delicate, rests on a deeper biological habit, the preservation of information across time. Genetic information is not memory in the human sense, but it is a form of continuity. It allows life to carry successful patterns beyond a single lifetime. Without that continuity, there would be no lineage, no animal history, and no human listener wondering about the first living seas. The ancient world therefore becomes less empty the more carefully we look. It was filled with life that did not resemble us, yet prepared the conditions for bodies that eventually could. The first chapters of our origin were written in cells too small to comfort the imagination, in changes too gradual to feel dramatic, and in a silence that was never truly silent. Oxygen feels ordinary to anyone breathing in the dark, but for most of Earth's history it was not ordinary at all. It was not simply the air waiting for lungs to arrive. It was a chemical condition that had to be made, resisted, absorbed, and slowly transformed into a possibility for larger life. The early planet did not offer animals the kind of atmosphere they would require. Its oceans and air passed through long changes before active bodies could spend energy freely. This matters because an animal body is expensive. Even a small animal must feed many cells, move materials through tissues, repair damage, and keep its chemistry stable. A larger body with muscles, senses, and coordinated movement requires more power. Without enough usable energy, life can remain alive, but it may remain limited in size, speed, and complexity. Oxygen is important here because it allows many organisms to release far more energy from food than simpler pathways can provide. It is not magic, and it is not the whole explanation, but it changes what a body can afford. Before the world contained enough oxygen in the right places, many forms of active animal life would have been difficult to sustain. The old microbial world had already found ways to live without oxygen-rich air that later animals would need. Some microbes used sunlight. Some used chemical reactions in dark places. Some lived in environments hostile to many animals today. Their success reminds us that life does not require the human world to exist. But the path toward animal bodies required a different energy landscape. Cells that cooperate in a body must not merely survive alone. They must support a shared structure. They must build tissues, maintain boundaries, and respond together. When we think about the distant origin of the human body, oxygen belongs to the background of every breath, heartbeat, and sleeping brain cell. A human brain cannot work without a steady supply of oxygen. Yet oxygen entered the story long before there were brains to depend on it. The planet had to be changed by life before life could become large enough to look back at the planet. This is one quiet paradox beneath the Cambrian question. The earliest organisms helped alter the world, but the benefits of those changes were not immediately expressed as animals. Oxygen released by photosynthetic microbes did not simply fill the air in a single clean movement. It reacted with oceans, minerals, and rocks. It was taken up by iron and other substances. It moved through reservoirs slowly, unevenly, and over immense spans of time. To human imagination, this can feel like delay. To Earth, it was chemistry unfolding through water and stone. The rise of oxygen was not a single moment when the planet became ready. It was a long reshaping of limits. Some environments may have become more favorable before others. Some organisms adapted to oxygen, while others were harmed by it. A substance that later allowed animal energy could also be dangerous to cells not prepared for its reactive nature. Oxygen was both opportunity and stress. Life had to learn not only to use it, but also to survive its effects. This gives the long pre-animal world a different shape. It was not a stage where nothing was happening. It was a planet negotiating with a powerful chemical. The later appearance of many animal forms in early Cambrian rocks may depend on this older negotiation. Bodies that move, sense, digest, and grow need energy, and energy depends on planetary chemistry as much as on genes. Yet caution remains necessary. Oxygen alone does not explain why animal bodies became visible when they did. Ecology, development, predation, genetics, and preservation matter too. Still, oxygen helps us understand why the first clear animal world could not simply appear whenever life began. The air had to become part of the story before breath became ours. The slow rise of oxygen did not simply place a new gas above the ancient sea, it changed the budget of life. In a world with little available oxygen, many organisms can still live, but the amount of energy they can draw from food is often limited. Small cells can manage with modest energy. Thin communities can spread across surfaces, absorb what they need, and continue without building large, moving bodies. But an animal is a different kind of demand. It must feed an organized interior. It must keep cells alive that are not directly touching the outside water. It must move nutrients inward and waste outward. It must repair tissues, coordinate growth, and sometimes move its whole body through resistance. These tasks are not free. They require a steady flow of energy, and oxygen can make that flow far more powerful. This is why the ancient increase of oxygen matters for the later visibility of animals in stone. It did not create eyes, mouths, or shells by itself. It did not command life to become complex. But it may have helped make larger and more active bodies biologically affordable. A body that crawls, swims, digs, or senses the world must spend energy before it can gain more. Movement is a risk. Muscle-like tissues, nerve-like signaling, and controlled digestion all require cells to work together at a higher cost than solitary life. If oxygen was scarce in many ancient environments, then the possible forms of life were held under an invisible ceiling. The ceiling was not absolute everywhere, and scientists still debate the details of timing and cause, but the general idea is simple. A planet's chemistry shapes the kinds of bodies that can persist on it. The human body shows this truth every second. Even when resting, it is not inactive. Blood moves, cells repair themselves, the brain maintains patterns, and breathing continues without conscious thought. That quiet dependence reaches back to a world where oxygen slowly became available as a tool for life. The path from early cells to human sleep is not direct, but it is continuous in one important way. Organized bodies need energy to remain organized. Oxygen also changed the oceans unevenly. Some waters could contain more oxygen while deeper or stagnant places remained poor in it. This unevenness would have mattered to early animals or their close relatives. A soft organism living on or near the seafloor would experience not an abstract atmosphere, but a local world of mud, water flow, microbes, minerals, and chemical gradients. Where oxygen was available, more active lifestyles may have been easier. Where it was low, life may have remained slower, thinner, or more restricted. The rise of oxygen, therefore, did not turn Earth into a single, ready-made stage. It created patches of possibility. Over time, those patches could expand, shrink, and shift, offering different pressures to different populations. This matters because evolution acts through populations, not through a single grand event. If some groups encountered slightly better energy conditions, they could explore new ways of feeding, growing, moving, or defending themselves. If those ways worked, descendants could carry them forward. If conditions changed, many lines could disappear. The later Cambrian record may preserve some results of these older experiments, but not the full process. The stones show us bodies and traces after many earlier thresholds had already been crossed. Oxygen is one of those thresholds. It belongs to the hidden preparation beneath the apparent suddenness. When we ask why animal life seems to appear so sharply after such a long interval, oxygen reminds us that evolution is not only about what genes can invent, it is also about what the planet permits. Before eyes could open in ancient seas, before shells could harden, before motion could leave clear tracks in sediment, the surrounding world had to provide enough energy for such bodies to be sustained. The breath of a sleeping person is, in that sense, a late echo of an older planetary change. Oxygen gives us one necessary condition, but it should not be mistaken for a complete answer. The history of animal origins is not a story where one chemical rises and suddenly the seas fill with bodies. Ancient life was shaped by many limits at once. Energy mattered, but so did genes, development, seafloor environments, ecological relationships, ocean chemistry, and the chance of preservation. If oxygen had increased without cells already having ways to cooperate, there would still be no animal body. If cells had learned cooperation without enough energy to maintain large tissues, their possibilities might have remained narrow. If animals existed but left no hard parts, no deep burrows, and no clear impressions, the stone record would still look poorer than the living world once was. This is why the Cambrian question must remain careful. The apparent arrival of many animal forms was probably not the result of one switch being turned on. It was more like a long room slowly becoming lit from several directions, until shapes that had been forming in darkness became visible enough for later minds to recognize them. Oxygen belongs to that light, but it is not the whole room. The body of an animal is a demanding arrangement. It needs cells that remain together without losing their own functions. It needs inherited instructions that can build a similar form again in the next generation. It needs surfaces that separate inside from outside, and sometimes tissues that allow food, waste, signals, or movement to pass through the body in ordered ways. These requirements are biological, not merely atmospheric. A more oxygenated world can help power them, but it cannot design them alone. Development had to become reliable enough for bodies to form repeatedly. Populations had to carry variation that natural selection could work upon. Environments had to offer both opportunity and pressure. A creature that moves must gain enough from motion to pay for motion. A creature that grows a harder surface must gain enough protection or support to justify the cost. A creature that senses light must live in a world where sensing light changes survival. None of this points to a single cause. It points to an accumulation of conditions. For the distant origin of humans, this is important because our own bodies are not the product of one ancient breakthrough. They are layered histories. Breathing depends on oxygen, but breathing also depends on tissues, circulation, control systems, and cells able to use oxygen safely. The sleeping brain depends on oxygen, but also on membranes, signals, energy pathways, and inherited developmental patterns. Human life is a late arrangement of many older solutions. When we trace those solutions backward, we do not find one clean beginning. We find a network of thresholds: cells, energy, cooperation, oxygen, bodies, movement, senses, and eventually nervous systems complex enough to remember and wonder. The early animal world stands somewhere in the middle of that network, not at the beginning and not at the end. Oxygen also reminds us that evolution is bound to place. It does not occur in empty space. It happens in water with certain chemistry, in sediments with certain textures, in climates that shift, on coastlines that disappear, and in populations that live or fail under local conditions. A soft animal living near the seafloor would not experience the whole planet. It would experience the oxygen in the water around it, the microbes under it, the particles above it, the neighbours beside it, and the dangers moving nearby. If conditions allowed a slightly more active body, that body still had to survive in a real environment. If it did not, the possibility ended there. This makes the long preparation before visible animals feel less like waiting and more like filtering. Many possibilities may have been tried. Many may have left no descendants. Many may have left no fossils. What we see in the Cambrian record is not every experiment life attempted, but those that became visible through preservation and through later survival. So oxygen should be held gently in the story. It helps explain why large active animal bodies could become more plausible after long ages of microbial life. It helps explain why a planet's own chemistry had to change before familiar bodies could flourish. But it does not erase the other causes, and it does not make the Cambrian world simple. The more honest lesson is quieter. Life did not suddenly discover complexity because it was ready in one way. It became visible after many kinds of readiness overlapped, and each one had roots deeper than the animals themselves. A single cell can live for itself. It can take in energy, divide, repair damage, and continue its own line without needing to ask another cell for permission. A multicellular body is different. It asks cells to remain together, to accept limits, and to serve a pattern larger than their individual survival. This is one of the deepest changes in the history of life. It is easy to overlook because a body feels obvious to us. We wake inside one. We breathe through one. We listen, remember, and sleep through one. But a body is not a simple pile of cells. It is a fragile agreement. Some cells must stay on the outside and face the world. Some must remain inside and depend on others for food and protection. Some must divide often. Others must stop dividing at the right time. Some may give up the direct chance to reproduce, so that the whole organism can continue through specialized reproductive cells. For animals to exist, cooperation had to become reliable enough to be inherited. Cells had to attach to one another, communicate, sense position, and follow developmental instructions that built a form again and again. Without this, a cluster of cells would remain only a temporary gathering, not a body. This matters for the long quiet before the Cambrian because multicellularity is not just larger size, it is a new kind of problem. When life is single-celled, each cell meets the environment directly. When life becomes a body, many cells are buried away from the outside. They need channels, signals, shared surfaces, and organized exchange. Food must reach them. Waste must leave. Damage in one place must not destroy the whole. Growth must be controlled, because too little growth fails, and too much growth becomes disorder. A body must hold together without becoming rigid, change without falling apart, and reproduce without losing its arrangement. These are difficult tasks. They could not be solved by oxygen alone, or by one fortunate mutation, or by a sudden wish toward complexity. They required older cellular abilities to be combined in stable ways. The distant origin of humans depends on this ancient cooperation. A human is not one living unit in the simplest sense. A human is a coordinated community of cells, with skin forming a border, gut lining an inner passage, blood carrying materials, and nerves sending signals through darkness and rest. Every quiet breath during sleep is possible, because cells do not live only for themselves. They maintain a shared body. That principle did not begin with people, mammals, or vertebrates. It reaches back to the early history of animals, and even before animals, to experiments in cells living together. Some microbial communities formed mats and layers. Some cells remained attached after division. Some lineages developed ways of communication and cooperation that helped them persist. Not all such arrangements became animals. Many forms of collective life are not animal bodies at all. Still, these older associations show that the boundary between solitary life and coordinated life could be crossed in more than one way. The animal path was one of those crossings, and it eventually allowed tissues, organs, movement, and sensation. Yet in its beginning, it may have been humble, cells staying together, sharing tasks, and responding to a common environment. In stone, such transitions are hard to see. Soft cell clusters vanish, early tissues decay. The first steps toward a body may leave no clear outline, no shell, no face, and no trace that a casual observer would recognize. This again makes deep time seem emptier than it was. Before animals appeared clearly, life may have been learning how to be more than one cell without becoming chaos. The first animal bodies were not inevitable. They were delicate solutions to the problem of cooperation, and every later body carries that old compromise. In that compromise, the long road toward eyes, muscles, and human awareness quietly began. A body made of many cells cannot survive if every cell behaves as though it were alone. Once cells remain together, the question changes. Survival is no longer only a matter of one cell feeding and dividing. It becomes a matter of arrangement. Some cells must face the outside world, where water, chemicals, pressure, light, and danger touch the surface first. Other cells must live inside, protected but dependent. Some cells may become better at moving materials. Others may become better at sensing. Others may help with digestion, attachment, repair, or reproduction. This kind of division of labor is one of the quiet foundations behind animal life. It is not dramatic like a predator chasing prey, and it does not immediately leave a shell in stone. But without it, a larger body cannot stay organized. A cluster of identical cells can be useful, but a true animal body needs differences that work together. The outside cannot do the same work as the inside. A surface cell has a different problem from a cell buried deeper in the body. A cell involved in reproduction has a different future from a cell that helps the organism move or feed. In this way, the earliest animal bodies required a new kind of biological trust. Cells had to give up some independence so the whole body could become more capable than any single cell alone. This did not mean they had intention or awareness. It means natural selection could favor arrangements where cooperation held together across generations. The origin of tissues was therefore a profound step. A tissue is more than a crowd. It is a group of cells shaped by shared position and shared function. In later animals, tissues can form skin-like surfaces, digestive linings, muscles, nerves, and reproductive structures. In the earliest animal relatives, the arrangements would have been simpler, but the principle was already important. Different cells doing different work inside one living body. This is one reason animal evolution could not be rushed from the first appearance of life. A body must know where its cells belong. It must build edges, layers, openings, and sometimes directions. It must decide, through inherited developmental processes, which cells remain near the surface and which become internal. It must control when cells divide and when they stop. It must maintain enough flexibility to grow, yet enough order not to collapse. The human body still lives by these ancient rules. Skin cells protect the boundary. Gut cells face the inner passage where food is broken down. Blood cells move through hidden channels. Nerve cells carry signals that allow the body to sense, rest, react, and remember. None of these cell types existed in their modern human form in the earliest animals, but the deeper idea of cellular specialization reaches back into the old transition toward bodies. When a person lies still and breathes quietly, the body seems like one thing. In truth, it is a carefully balanced population of cooperating cells. Its unity is an achievement renewed every moment. That achievement has roots in the time when life first began to organize cells into lasting patterns. For ancient animals, specialization also created new risks. A single cell can fail and be replaced by its descendants if conditions allow. In a body, failure in one group of cells can harm all the others. If the surface is damaged, the inside becomes exposed. If feeding cells fail, internal cells starve. If reproductive cells fail, the body leaves no future. If communication breaks down, growth may become disorder. Cooperation brings power, but it also brings dependence. This is why multicellular life is not simply a larger version of single-celled life. It is a different way of being alive. It allows bodies to become thicker, more complex, and more interactive with their surroundings, but it also requires constant regulation. The early seafloor would not have rewarded every attempt at complexity. Some arrangements may have been too costly. Some may have worked only in narrow environments. Some may have disappeared without leaving any sign. Others may have persisted because their division of labor allowed them to feed, attach, filter, move, or reproduce more effectively. Over time, these successful arrangements could become more stable. They could be copied through development. They could vary slightly across generations. They could give rise to new body plans later visible in Cambrian rocks. The key point is that animal life did not only require more cells, it required cells that could become different without breaking the whole. That difference between sameness and organized variety lies close to the heart of the title's mystery. The world did not wait 3 billion years because nothing was happening. It took time for life to build the conditions under which many cells could share one fate. Before eyes, shells, mouths, or movement became clear in the fossil record, life had to learn the quieter art of becoming a body. The human body can feel like a single self, especially in stillness. A person lies down, breathes slowly, closes the eyes, and experiences the body as one quiet presence. But beneath that calm surface, the body is not one simple thing. It is a vast cooperation of cells, each living within limits set by the whole. No skin cell knows the story of the person it helps protect. No blood cell understands the memory carried in the brain it nourishes. No nerve cell alone can hear a voice, recall a place, or imagine ancient seas. Yet together, through inherited order and constant communication, these cells make a loving body possible. This deep cooperation is one of the oldest bridges between the microbial world and the animal world. It is also one of the hidden answers to why animal life could not appear as soon as life began. Life first had to learn how many cells could become one organism without losing the stability that single cells already possessed. In a human being, this cooperation has become extremely elaborate. Cells divide along different paths. Some become muscle, some become bone, some become immune cells, some become the lining of the gut, and some become parts of the nervous system. Each type carries the same broad inherited library, yet each reads only certain instructions. This allows one body to contain many kinds of work. The ancient beginning of this principle was far simpler, but the logic was already profound. A body requires cells to share information about position, timing, and role. A cell must behave differently if it lies on an outer surface than if it lies inside. It must respond to neighbors. It must join, fold, hold, release, and sometimes die at the right moment so the larger form can continue. The animal body is therefore not merely a larger life form, it is a controlled society, and that society has to be rebuilt in every generation. This is where the story touches the origin of humans in a very quiet way. Long before a human embryo forms organs, It begins through cell division, arrangement, and specialization. The process is modern in its details, but ancient in its underlying problem. How can one starting cell give rise to many cells that do different things while still belonging to one body? That question reaches back into the earliest history of animal development. It reaches beyond bones, beyond skulls, beyond the first primates, beyond the first vertebrates, back toward the time when cells first became reliable partners. The later human mind rests on this older success. A thought can occur only because cells have organized into tissues, tissues into organs, and organs into a body stable enough to support awareness. Before the brain could wonder why life took so long, the body had to inherit a very old discipline of cellular cooperation. But cooperation is not easy. It must be protected against failure. If cells grow without restraint, the body is harmed. If cells refuse their role, tissues break down. If communication weakens, the body loses order. These problems did not begin with humans. They are consequences of multicellular life itself. To be many-celled is to gain power and vulnerability at the same time. A multicellular organism can become larger, more durable, more active, and more capable of interacting with the world. It can place some cells at the surface and shelter others within. It can create shapes that no single cell could create alone. Yet it also becomes dependent on trust without consciousness, on rules without intention, on inherited patterns that must work again and again. Early animal bodies must have lived within these constraints. Some arrangements may have been too unstable to persist. Some may have worked for a time and then vanished. Some may have left no recognizable fossil because they were too soft, too small, or too rarely preserved. What appears later in Cambrian rocks as a great visibility of animal forms was built upon earlier experiments in cooperation that were mostly hidden from direct view. This makes the long pre-animal world feel less empty. It becomes a period in which life was testing the possibility of unity. Not unity as a mind, not unity as a plan, but unity as a body. The cells of animals learned, through evolution rather than purpose, how to become different and remain connected. From that ancient achievement came tissues, surfaces, mouths, guts, nerves, muscles, and eventually the fragile body of a human listener resting in the dark. The road from the first cells to human awareness is not straight, and it should not be made simple. But one thing can be said carefully. Before life could become visible as animals, it had to learn how to hold many living parts inside one shared form. Before the Cambrian seas became crowded in the fossil record, Earth had already hosted forms of life that do not fit easily into the imagination. They were not microbes in the simplest sense, yet many were not animals in the familiar modern sense either. In rocks older than the Cambrian, scientists have found impressions of soft, sometimes large organisms from the Ediacaran world. Some looked like fronds pressed into the seafloor. Some appeared as quilted ovals, ribbed shapes, discs, or branching forms. Many had no obvious heads, legs, mouths, eyes, or hard skeletons. They do not look like the animals people know from modern oceans, and that is part of their quiet power. They remind us that the history before the visible rise of Cambrian animals was not empty. It was stranger than emptiness. It was a world of living forms that challenged the categories built from later life. These organisms lived in seas long before any human body, long before any mammal, long before bones or speech or memory. Yet they belong to the deeper background of our own origin because they show that complex life had begun exploring shape before the Cambrian record became so clear. The Ediacaran world asks us to pause before accepting the idea that nothing evolved for billions of years. Something was happening, but it did not always move toward forms we can easily name. Some Ediacaran organisms may have been early animals, or close to animals, while others may represent experiments without living descendants that can be identified with certainty. Science treats them carefully because soft ancient bodies rarely explain themselves. A pressed outline in stone can show that something existed, but not always how it fed, moved, reproduced, or related to later groups. This uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It is part of the honesty required by deep time. The stones do not give us a complete census of life. They give us fragments, and those fragments must be read slowly. Some Ediacaran forms may have rested on microbial mats, absorbing nutrients or living in ways unlike familiar animals. Some may have interacted with the seafloor in subtle ways. Some may have been part of early ecosystems where motion, feeding, and competition were less obvious than they would become later. The important point is not to force them into a simple role as direct ancestors of modern animals. The important point is that they reveal a pre-Cambrian world already testing larger, softer, more organized bodies. For the future human lineage, this matters because our animal inheritance did not emerge from a blank ocean. It emerged after a long period in which cells, tissues, surfaces, and ecological relationships were becoming more complex. The path toward bodies with guts, nerves, muscles, and senses was not a single leap from bacteria to animals. Between microscopic life and the later Cambrian record lay many thresholds, some preserved only faintly. The Ediacaran organisms stand near one of those thresholds. They show that life had begun to make visible forms before shells and burrows became common enough to shout from the rock record. Yet, they also show how much was lost. Many of these forms seem to disappear before or during the transition into Cambrian ecosystems. Their world may not have led directly into ours in a simple line. It may have included side branches, extinct designs, and ways of being alive that have no modern equivalent. This is the cold part of evolution. Not every experiment becomes an ancestor. Some are beautiful only because they are gone. When we listen to their silence in stone, the ancient earth no longer feels empty. It feels full of attempts, most of them unfinished. The later animal world did not erase that earlier complexity. It inherited a planet already marked by vanished possibilities and by forms of life that reach toward bodies without becoming the animals we recognize. Soft life is difficult for stone to remember. A shell can remain after the living tissue has disappeared. A tooth can outlast the mouth that held it. A bone can be buried, mineralized, and carried forward into the future as a hard witness. But a soft body is a much more delicate event. It can collapse, decay, be eaten, be disturbed by currents, or disappear into the sediment without leaving a clear outline. This simple fact changes how the ancient world appears to us. It means the past is not preserved evenly. The fossil record does not show all life with equal fairness. It favors the hard, the buried, the mineralized, the repeated, and the lucky. A world full of soft organisms can later look strangely empty, not because the organisms were absent, but because their bodies were poorly suited to becoming stone. This is one reason the time before the Cambrian can seem quieter than it really was. Many Ediacaran organisms were soft. Some left impressions only under special conditions, often when fine sediments covered them quickly enough to hold a trace of their shape. Others may have vanished without any mark at all. If their tissues were thin, fragile, or chemically easy to break down, the chance of preservation was small. If they lived in places where sediment did not cover them gently, their bodies would not remain. If later heat, pressure, or erosion changed the rock, even preserved traces could be damaged or erased. So when we look backward and see fewer clear bodies, we have to ask whether life was truly rare or whether the record simply failed to keep it. This is not a small technical detail. It lies near the heart of the title's mystery. The apparent suddenness of animal life may partly come from a change in life itself, but also from a change in what life could leave behind. Once organisms began to make harder parts, dig into sediment, build resistant surfaces, or disturb the seafloor in recognizable ways, the ancient record became louder. It began to hold marks that modern eyes can identify more easily. Before that, the signs were quieter. The Ediacaran world may have contained communities of organisms that lived, grew, reproduced, and interacted, yet left only rare and uncertain evidence. This makes the pre-Cambrian past feel like a room heard through a thick wall. We know sound was there, but not every word reaches us. For the distant origin of humans, this matters because our own lineage belongs to the animal world that eventually became more visible, but the roots of that world passed through times when bodies could vanish almost completely. We are used to thinking of ancestry through bones, skulls, teeth, limbs, footprints, tools. It reaches into soft tissues, cells, surfaces, and forms that could decay before stone had time to speak. Before the first vertebrate bones, before the first mammal jaw, before the first human hand, there were living bodies whose preservation depended on conditions so precise that entire worlds could fade from evidence. This should make the story more humble. The absence of fossils is not always the absence of life. Sometimes it is the absence of preservation. A creature may have lived fully in its own world and still leave no direct trace for ours. In the Ediacaran seas, soft organisms may have rested on microbial mats spread across surfaces, stood like fronds in the water, or formed shapes that do not match later animal designs. Some may have been early animals, but many remain uncertain. Their softness makes interpretation hard. A flattened impression may show an outline, but not a gut. A ribbed shape may show structure, but not movement. A disc may mark an organism, an attachment point, or something more difficult to understand. The deeper the time, the more carefully each claim must be held. This is why honest science does not turn every strange fossil into a direct ancestor, or every gap into proof that nothing was there. It reads the rock as a partial record shaped by decay, burial, chemistry, and chance. The Cambrian record feels dramatic because more bodies and traces become visible, but visibility is not the same as first existence. Some animal roots may reach earlier than their clearest fossils. Some Precambrian forms may have belonged to side branches that ended. Some may have been part of ecosystems unlike anything now alive. The loss is part of the lesson. Evolution is not only a history of successful descendants. It is also a history of forms that lived without continuing, and of bodies that vanished before they could be remembered. The soft Ediacaran world teaches us that the ancient Earth was not empty simply because it was faint. It was a living world filtered by the rules of preservation, and those rules shaped the illusion that animals arrived out of silence. The first clear animal world did not arrive like a curtain rising on an empty stage. It arrived more like a coastline appearing through fog. Some shapes had been there earlier, faint and strange. Some had vanished before they could be fully understood. Some may have belonged to lineages that left no descendants. Then, in Cambrian rocks, the record begins to show animals with a new sharpness. There are hard parts, repeated forms, traces of movement, bodies pressing into sediment, and evidence that life was interacting with the seafloor in more active ways. To a human mind looking across deep time, this can feel sudden. After long ages of microbial traces and soft impressions, the stone begins to hold shells, limbs, spines, tubes, burrows, and feeding marks. But suddenness in the rock is not the same as instant creation in life. It is a change in evidence, a change in bodies, and a change in the relationship between organisms and their environment. The Cambrian world matters because it is where many animal forms become visible enough for us to recognize a new biological landscape. Before this, the Ediacaran seas had already shown that larger soft life existed, yet many Ediacaran organisms remain difficult to connect with later animals. Some may represent early experiments near the animal path. Others may be distant side branches, living designs that ended without becoming part of the modern tree. Their disappearance reminds us that evolution is not a ladder. It is closer to a branching shore, where many channels open, shift, and vanish. The line that eventually leads to humans is only one late thread in a larger fabric. It did not move forward because all other forms were waiting for it. It survived because certain biological arrangements continued, while many others did not. The early Cambrian record reveals some of those arrangements more clearly. Bodies were becoming easier for stone to hold because some organisms made harder materials. Movement left traces, feeding disturbed sediment, burrowing changed the seafloor. These marks give paleontologists more than outlines. They give hints of behavior without requiring us to imagine thoughts. A burrow suggests movement through sediment. A shell suggests protection or mineralized structure. A feeding trace suggests contact between a body and its surroundings. None of these signs should be made more dramatic than they are, but together they show that animal life had entered a phase where bodies and environments were shaping one another in ways that could be preserved. This is where the old silence begins to break, not because life was silent before, but because the language of preservation became clearer. For the origin of humans, this change is important and distant. Human beings did not exist in these seas. No primate, mammal, reptile, fish, or land animal walked there in any familiar sense. Yet the deeper animal inheritance of the human body belongs to this broad transformation. The idea of a body with direction, tissues, feeding, sensation, movement, and inherited form becomes more visible in these rocks. Our later organs are not copied from Cambrian creatures in any simple way, but they rest on animal principles established in that remote world. The sleeping human body, with its gut quietly working, nerves signaling, and cells using oxygen, is a late outcome of a history that passed through early experiments in form. The Cambrian record therefore should not be treated as a magic beginning. It is better understood as a brightening of the fossil record after a long period of hidden preparation. The Ediacaran world shows that Precambrian life was not empty. The Cambrian world shows that animal bodies became more visible, more varied, and more capable of leaving durable marks. Between them lies one delicate transition in the history of life. Not the moment when everything began, but the moment when enough had changed for the stones to begin speaking in shapes we can almost understand. A living organism and a fossil are not the same thing, separated only by time. Between them lies a difficult passage. A body must die in the right place, be buried in the right way, avoid being destroyed too quickly, and pass through chemical and geological changes without losing every trace of its form. Most living things never make that passage. They disappear back into the world that fed them. Their tissues are eaten, dissolved, scattered, compressed, or erased. This means the fossil record is not a perfect memory of life. It is a selective memory, shaped by burial, minerals, decay, pressure, water, and chance. When we look into ancient rocks and ask why animals seem to appear so suddenly, we are not only asking what life was doing, we are also asking what stone was able to keep. That distinction matters deeply. A sea may be full of life and still leave little behind. A soft organism without a shell, spine, tooth, or mineralized surface may live, reproduce, interact, and vanish with almost no durable signature. A small body may be too delicate to survive the first stages of decay. A body lying on an exposed seafloor may be disturbed by currents or consumed by other organisms before sediment can cover it. Even when an impression forms, later heat and pressure can deform it. Rocks themselves can be uplifted, broken, buried deeper, or worn away by erosion. The silence of deep time is therefore not only biological, it is also geological. Earth does not keep every page of its own history. It tears, rewrites, burns, folds, and buries them. This is one reason the visible rise of animals in the Cambrian record must be read with care. It may show a real biological transformation, and it does, but it also shows a transformation in preservable evidence. Bodies began to leave clearer marks. Some organisms produced harder parts, others moved through sediment in ways that made lasting traces. Feeding disturbed surfaces. Burrowing changed layers of mud. These signs allowed later observers to see activity where earlier life may have left only faint chemical or textural clues. The difference is like hearing a whisper become speech. The voice may have existed before, but only later did it become clear enough to carry across time. For the human story, this is more than a technical point about fossils. Human beings tend to trust what can be seen. We recognize bones, shells, footprints, and tools more easily than chemistry or microbial textures. Much later in human evolution, skulls and stone tools would become powerful evidence because they are durable enough to survive. But the deeper origin of the human body belongs to a time before such obvious markers. It belongs to soft tissues, cells, and early animal arrangements that were often unlikely to fossilize. The body listening now is made mostly of soft living material. Without special burial, it too would vanish almost entirely. Its thoughts would leave no fossil. Its sleep would leave no mark. Its cells would return to the earth without telling future stones what they had felt. This should make us cautious when we look at the ancient past. Absence in the record is not always absence in life. It may be absence of preservation. A creature can be real and still almost invisible to history. The Cambrian record feels so important because more organisms crossed the difficult passage from life into stone. Once shells, plates, spines, tubes, and tougher outer structures became more common, the chance of preservation increased. Once animals disturbed sediment with repeated movements, they could leave evidence even when their bodies disappeared. A burrow is not the animal, but it is a record of animal activity. A scratch is not a mouth, but it may hint at feeding. A track is not a body, but it shows that a body moved. These indirect traces are precious because they tell us that life was acting, not merely existing. Still, they must not be stretched beyond what they can say. A trace can reveal movement without revealing thought. It can show contact with mud without telling us intention. The ancient sea floor was not a stage of human motives. It was a place where bodies met oxygen, sediment, microbes, food, and other bodies under conditions we can only partly reconstruct. The first step in understanding the Cambrian is to respect the gap between living reality and preserved evidence. What appears in rock is not the whole animal world. It is the part that survived the long test of becoming fossil. The mystery is therefore not only why animal bodies became more varied, it is also why, at a certain point, they began leaving signatures strong enough for the earth to remember. A hard shell is more than protection for a living animal. It is also a message to the future. Soft tissue usually returns quickly to the world around it, but mineralized surfaces can remain long enough to be buried, altered, and found again. When early animals began producing harder outer coverings, tiny plates, tubes, spines, or shells, they changed not only how they lived, but also how they could be remembered. A soft body may vanish without leaving a clear shape, while a harder surface can survive decay and preserve an outline. This does not mean that hard parts appeared for the sake of fossils. Evolution does not work for future paleontologists. Hard parts may have helped with defense, support, attachment, feeding, or dealing with the chemistry of seawater, but once they existed, they made animal life much more visible in stone. The ancient record became louder because some bodies had become more durable. This helps explain why the Cambrian world can feel so sudden to us. It is not only that animals were changing, it is that some of their changes created better evidence. A shell can tell us that an organism had a boundary strong enough to resist the world. A spine can suggest protection or support. A tube can hint at a fixed or sheltered way of living. Small plates can show that the surface of a body was no longer just soft skin. These remains do not tell a complete story, but they give the rock a vocabulary it did not have before. Earlier life may have been active, complex, and diverse in ways that rarely became fossils. Later, when harder structures became more common, the same stone record began to hold repeated signs of animal presence. The difference is not perfect, but it is powerful. It can make a long preparation look like a sudden arrival. Burrows and tracks add another kind of signature. A body can disappear, but its movement can remain. When an animal pushes through sediment, scrapes a surface, digs downward, or disturbs layers of mud, it may leave a trace that outlives the body itself. These traces are important because they preserve behavior in a limited, careful sense. They do not reveal thought, fear, planning, or intention. They show that a body interacted with its surroundings. A burrow means something moved through or into sediment. A trail means something passed across a surface. Reworked mud can show that organisms were changing the sea floor rather than merely resting on it. This matters because an animal body is not only an object, it is an activity. It feeds, moves, anchors, hides, explores, or filters. Once those activities began altering sediment in ways that could be preserved, the ancient Earth started recording not just shapes, but actions. For the deep origin of humans, this is a distant but meaningful turn. Much later, human ancestors would leave footprints, tools, cut marks, hearths, and bones. Those traces help us understand bodies that are far closer to us in time, but the principle is older. A living being can be known by what it leaves behind when the body is gone. In the Cambrian seas, the earliest clear animal traces are not human in any way, yet they belong to the same broad problem of evidence. How can a vanished life become visible to a later mind? How can movement outlast the mover? How can a brief contact with mud survive for hundreds of millions of years? The answer depends on the meeting of biology and geology. The animal must act in a way that marks the environment, and the environment must preserve the mark. Neither side alone is enough. If a creature burrows but the sediment is later destroyed, the trace is lost. If sediment is perfect but no organism disturbs it, no trace appears. Fossils are born from this rare agreement between life and earth. The rise of harder bodies and clearer traces also suggests that early animals were changing their relationship with the seafloor. They were not only existing in water, some were beginning to engineer their small surroundings. Burrowing could mix sediment. Grazing could disturb microbial mats. Hard surfaces could resist damage or allow new forms of attachment. These activities may have altered the habitats of other organisms, creating further pressures and possibilities. Again, caution is needed. A preserved shell does not explain an entire ecology. A burrow does not tell us the full animal. But together, hard parts and trace fossils show that animal life was becoming more physically insistent. It pressed into the world. It scratched, dug, hardened, and left repeated marks. This is why the Cambrian record feels like a sudden awakening. It is a record of bodies becoming easier to preserve and actions becoming easier to detect. The world before it was not empty. It was quieter in the language of stone. Once shells, spines, tubes, plates, trails, and burrows entered the record more clearly, ancient life began to speak in forms we can follow. The animals were not appearing for our benefit. They were living under their own limits. But by becoming harder, more active, and more entangled with sediment, they allowed the earth to remember them with a clarity that earlier life rarely received. The Cambrian record can look like a sudden sunrise, but it is safer to think of it as a moment when hidden life became much easier to see. The animals did not step onto an empty earth. They entered a record already shaped by microbes, soft organisms, changing oceans, rising oxygen, and experiments in cellular cooperation. What changed was not only life itself, but the visibility of life. Bodies began to carry harder surfaces. Animals disturbed sediment in ways that could last. Some forms were buried under conditions that held their shapes. The result is a rock record that seems to brighten quickly after a long dim age. This brightness can mislead if we treat it as the absolute beginning of animals. It is better understood as a crossing of thresholds. Some thresholds were biological. Cells organized into tissues, bodies formed patterns, organisms fed and moved in more active ways. Some thresholds were environmental. Oxygen and ocean chemistry allowed more energetic life in some places. Some thresholds were geological. Shells, tubes, plates, and burrows had a better chance of becoming evidence. When these thresholds overlapped, the stones began to preserve animal life with unusual clarity. That is why the phrase, "every animal appeared at once," must be held carefully. It captures the shock of the fossil record, but not the full reality behind it. The Cambrian world did not contain every animal on Earth in the modern sense. It did not contain birds, mammals, insects, flowering plant ecosystems, or human ancestors walking on land. It contained early animal groups and body plans that made the later history of animals much more visible. Some lineages would survive in changed forms, others would disappear. Some fossils would become famous because they look strange to modern eyes, while others would matter because they reveal deeper patterns of animal organization. The power of the Cambrian record is not that it gives us the first moment of all life. It gives us a moment when animal bodies became readable. Reading that record requires patience. A fossil shell does not tell us everything about the animal that made it. A trace in mud does not show a mind. A body outline does not always reveal how a creature fed or moved. But together, these signs show a world in which life was becoming more physical, more interactive, and more likely to leave marks. The seafloor was no longer only a surface where soft forms might rest and vanish. It was becoming a place of digging, grazing, anchoring, hiding, and contact. Animals were beginning to change the small worlds around them. Sediment could be mixed. Microbial mats could be disturbed. Hard parts could alter who survived an encounter. These changes may have created feedback, where one body's new habit changed conditions for another. Still, the story should not be pushed into a simple race or battle too early. The evidence allows us to say that animal activity became clearer. It does not allow us to imagine detailed intentions inside ancient creatures. For the distant origin of humans, this matters because our own animal nature comes from such ancient shifts, though not in a straight line. The human body is not a Cambrian fossil made modern. It is a late branch on a much larger tree, yet some deep principles were already becoming visible then. Bodies with direction, surfaces that protect and interact, feeding structures, movement, inherited forms, and the first clearer records of animals shaping their surroundings. Long before a human hand left marks on cave walls, long before footprints crossed volcanic ash, long before bones could tell the story of our ancestors, early animals were leaving simpler marks in sea sediment. They did not know they were writing, but their bodies pressed into a world that could sometimes remember. This is the quiet meaning of Cambrian visibility. It is not a miracle of sudden completeness. It is the meeting point of living change and geological memory. The ancient Earth had been alive for a long time, but much of that life spoke in signals too faint for us to hear easily. In Cambrian rocks, the signal becomes stronger. The stones begin to show bodies that look more like animals, not because life had no history before them, but because history had finally gained shapes durable enough to cross deep time. The apparent explosion is therefore both real and limited. Real, because animal diversity and activity became strikingly visible. Limited, because every visible body rested on older conditions that had been gathering in the dark for ages. What appears sudden in stone may be the first clear sentence of a story that had been whispered for billions of years. A body changes meaning when another body can eat it. In a quiet microbial world, danger existed, but not always in a way that produced shells, spines, eyes, or sudden movement. Cells competed, absorbed, poisoned, crowded, and consumed one another in ancient forms of interaction, yet the visible shape of life remained limited. Once larger organisms began meeting one another as food, obstacle, surface, or threat, the body itself became a field of pressure. A soft outer layer was no longer only a boundary. It could become a weakness. A thicker surface was no longer only a cost. It could become a defense. Movement was no longer only a way to reach food. It could become a way to escape being food. This does not mean the early animal seas were filled with conscious fear. Fear, as humans feel it, belongs to nervous systems far more complex than those ancient bodies. But natural selection does not need fear to shape a response. If one form survived better because it was harder to bite, harder to swallow, faster to leave a surface, or better at hiding in sediment, that form could leave more descendants. Over many generations, such differences could make bodies more varied and more visible. Predation is therefore not only an act of eating, it is an ecological relationship that can change the design of life. A grazer scraping microbial mats can alter the seafloor. A small animal pushing through mud can create shelter and disturbance at the same time. A creature with a harder covering can make another creature work harder to feed. A moving animal can make stillness dangerous for others. Each interaction changes the costs of shape. A spine may be expensive to grow, but it may also reduce the chance of being taken. A shell may slow movement, but it may allow survival through contact. A burrow may require effort, but it may protect a soft body from the open surface. These are not dramatic stories in the human sense. They are balances of energy, risk, and reproduction. The distant origin of humans is connected to this because our own animal body is built in a world where bodies have long responded to other bodies. Human skin, senses, reflexes, movement, and pain systems belong to a very late branch of a much older animal problem. How to remain alive in a world where life itself can become danger. Long before the human nervous system could register threat, early animals were already shaped by contact, damage, escape, feeding, and protection. The Cambrian record becomes clearer during a time when such interactions may have intensified. Hard parts, traces of movement, and disturbed sediments suggest that animals were doing more than passively existing. They were pressing into one another's worlds. Some were feeding in new ways. Some were defending themselves in new ways. Some were changing the ground beneath them. This could create feedback. A new defense can favor a new feeding method. A new feeding method can favor better protection. Better movement can favor better sensing. Better sensing can make movement more useful. None of these changes require a planned direction toward complexity. They require only differences that matter in survival and reproduction. Still, predation should not be turned into the only key. Oxygen, development, genetics, ocean chemistry, and preservation all remain important. The rise of animal forms was not one cause wearing many masks. It was many pressures meeting in ancient seas. Predation helps explain why bodies may have become more armoured, mobile, and shaped by interaction, but it does not erase the hidden foundations laid earlier. The old question remains open. When life began to eat, avoid, resist, and pursue in more visible ways, did the body become the main place where evolution could be seen? And in that shift, the quiet sea became a place where form itself carried lasting memory, cost, and consequence. Once eating and avoiding being eaten became more important in animal life, the outer shape of a body could no longer be neutral. A soft animal resting openly on the seafloor faced different risks from one that could cover itself, dig downward, cling tightly, or move away. A thin surface might be enough in a world with little active attack, but in a world where contact could cause injury, surfaces mattered more. This is where shells, spines, plates, burrows, and stronger body walls become easier to understand. They were not ornaments. They were ways of negotiating with danger, water, sediment, and other living bodies. A shell could make an animal harder to damage or swallow. A spine could make contact more costly. A thicker surface could help resist scraping, biting, or abrasion. A burrow could place soft tissue below the open seafloor, away from some hazards above. None of these features had to be perfect to matter. In evolution, a small advantage can be enough if it changes who survives long enough to reproduce. The important point is that the body was becoming a record of interaction. It carried signs of what the surrounding world demanded. Movement also changed the value of shape. To move is to spend energy, and energy is never free. A moving animal must gain something from motion, or the cost becomes too high. It might reach food more effectively. It might leave a dangerous surface. It might enter sediment. It might avoid being covered, eaten, or trapped. Once movement becomes useful, other features can become useful with it. A body with a front end meeting the world first can benefit from sensing conditions ahead. A body that moves through mud may need a shape suited to pushing or gliding. A body that swims or crawls may benefit from muscles or muscle-like tissues arranged in coordinated ways. Over time, movement can make the world feel different to life. A passive organism receives what comes to it. A moving organism enters new conditions. It crosses gradients of light, oxygen, food, and danger. It encounters other bodies more often. This does not mean it thinks about those encounters. It means its form is tested by them. Burrowing is especially important because it changes both the animal and the seafloor. A creature that enters sediment does not merely hide. It alters layers, mixes materials, and creates small spaces where water and chemistry may move differently. Burrowing can protect a soft body, but it can also disturb microbial mats and reshape the environment for other organisms. In this way, animal behavior, even without thought, can become geological. A trail, a tunnel, or a disturbed layer of mud can survive after the animal is gone. The seafloor begins to hold the memory of bodies in motion. For the distant origin of humans, this is an early echo of a much later principle. Human beings leave footprints, paths, tools, scars on landscapes, and traces of behavior that survive beyond a single life. Early animals left far simpler marks, but they show the same broad truth. Bodies do not only live in environments, they change them. Long before people changed riverbanks, forests, or fields, animals were already changing sediment grain by grain. Sensing would have gained new importance in such a world. If nothing moves and nothing attacks, the ability to detect direction may be limited in value. But when food, danger, shelter, and contact vary across space, sensing becomes more meaningful. Light-sensitive cells could help an organism respond to day, shadow, depth, or movement around it. Chemical sensing could help locate food or avoid harmful conditions. Touch could guide a body across a surface or into sediment. These early sensory capacities should not be confused with human perception. They were not thoughts, images, or decisions as we experience them. They were biological responses. Still, they made bodies more connected to their surroundings. A shell protects, but a shell alone does not guide. A burrow hides, but the animal must enter or maintain it. Movement helps, but movement becomes more valuable when a body can respond to what lies ahead. The Cambrian record preserves some of this transformation indirectly. We see harder parts, traces, and forms that suggest animals were interacting more actively with the world. We do not see every soft tissue, every early sensory cell, or every failed experiment. Many attempts would have disappeared without descendants or fossils. What remains is enough to suggest that life was entering a phase where defense, motion, feeding, and sensing affected one another. A new predator could favor better armor. Better armor could favor stronger feeding structures. More movement could favor better sensing. Better hiding could change how others searched. These loops did not need to produce progress in a straight line. They produced consequences. Some bodies became more costly but safer. Some became more active but more dependent on energy. Some became better preserved because their defenses were hard enough to fossilize. The title's mystery becomes clearer here, but not solved too soon. The animals did not simply appear because life suddenly became inventive. The ancient sea had begun to reward bodies that could meet other bodies differently, and those rewards slowly turned form into survival. Predation can help explain why early animal bodies became more defensive, more mobile, and more visible in stone, but it should never be treated as the single cause behind the Cambrian transformation. Ancient life was not waiting for one enemy to appear and force everything forward. The story was more layered than that. Oxygen had to make more active bodies possible in some environments. Cells had to cooperate in stable ways. Development had to build repeated forms across generations. Seafloor conditions had to allow movement, feeding, burial, and preservation. Genes had to carry variation that could be tested by changing surroundings. Predation entered this already complex world as one pressure among many. It may have sharpened the value of armor, speed, burrowing, sensing, and new feeding structures, but it did not invent the whole animal body from nothing. A shell is useful only if the organism can build it, pay for it, and still live well enough to reproduce. Movement is useful only if energy is available, and the body can coordinate itself. Sensing is useful only if signals from the world can change the outcome of life. Each feature depends on other foundations. The ancient sea was therefore not a simple battlefield. It was a network of costs. A harder body might resist damage, but it might also require minerals and energy. A faster body might escape danger, but it might need more food. A burrowing body might find shelter, but it might face low oxygen or difficult sediment. A sharper feeding structure might open new sources of food, but it might also change the risks for other organisms. Evolution works through such balances. It does not reward complexity by itself. It rewards arrangements that persist under real conditions. This is important for the distant origin of humans because our own bodies still carry the consequences of ancient balances. The human skeleton protects and supports, but it also costs energy to grow. Human senses help guide movement, but they depend on delicate tissues and constant maintenance. Pain warns of damage, but it is not a perfect system. The body is full of compromises, and those compromises belong to a much older animal history in which survival was never free. Early animals did not know this. They did not choose strategies. Their populations changed because some bodies left more descendants than others under the pressures around them. That quiet process, repeated through generations, could turn small differences into lasting patterns. Predation may also have changed how organisms affected one another's evolution. If one animal became harder to eat, another might only succeed if it fed differently. If one animal began digging, another might follow traces or exploit disturbed sediment. If one organism grazed microbial mats, it could change the surface for others. These interactions could form feedback loops, where one change altered the meaning of many other changes. But even here, caution is needed. The fossil record gives traces and bodies, not complete scenes. It does not let us watch every encounter. It does not tell us which animal sensed what, or whether a certain spine evolved only because of a certain predator. It allows careful inference, not certainty about every detail. The honest view is that predation likely helped intensify the importance of body form, while other causes made those forms possible and preservable. When many pressures overlapped, animal life could begin to look more varied in the record. Bodies hardened, seafloors were disturbed, movement left marks, feeding became more visible. Some lineages survived, while others vanished into stone or disappeared without leaving even that. The Cambrian world, seen this way, was not the beginning of violence and not the beginning of life. It was a time when relationships between living bodies became easier to see. One body could shape the future of another by touching it, eating it, resisting it, or changing the ground beneath it. From those interactions came new costs and new openings. Still, the title's mystery remains larger than predation. For billions of years, life had been building invisible capacities. Then, when environmental, biological, ecological, and preservational conditions began to overlap, animals became visible in a way that still startles the human mind. Predation was part of that awakening, but not the whole explanation. It was one cold pressure among many, turning the body into something that could no longer be merely alive. The body now had to endure contact, resist damage, search, hide, move, and leave marks in a world where life itself had become one of life's greatest forces. A body that moves through the world begins to have a direction. This sounds simple, but it marks a deep change in animal life. A floating or fixed organism may meet the environment from many sides in a more even way. Food, water, light, chemicals and danger may arrive from around it. But a moving animal enters the world front first. One end encounters what is ahead before the rest of the body does. Over time, this can make the front end important. Sensing, feeding, and response may become concentrated there, not because life planned ahead, but because direction changes what survival demands. If a body regularly moves one way, the leading edge becomes the place where information matters most. It may meet food first. It may meet danger first. It may meet sediment, shadow, current, or another body before any deeper tissue can respond. This is why the distinction between front and back is not just a matter of shape. It is a matter of living in space. The early animal world did not need to become human-like to discover direction. It only needed bodies whose movement made one side different from another. Along with front and back, many animals developed a difference between upper and lower surfaces. A body lying on or moving near the seafloor faces one world above and another below. The upper side may meet open water, light, drifting particles, or approaching organisms. The lower side may meet mud, microbial mats, rough sediment, chemical exigents, and surfaces for attachment or crawling. This difference can make the body more organized. Cells and tissues on one side may do different work from those on the other. A surface touching sediment may need protection, grip, or sensory contact. A surface facing water may be shaped by flow, exposure, or feeding. Again, this is not a sudden leap to complex animals. It is a quiet consequence of living in a world where space is uneven. The seafloor is not the same as the water above it. The front is not the same as the rear. A body that can register and preserve these differences gains a new kind of order. Left and right symmetry adds another layer. Many animals are arranged so that the left and right sides mirror each other broadly, while the front, back, top, and bottom remain different. This arrangement is useful for movement because a balanced body can travel more steadily in one direction. It can place muscles, sensory surfaces, and appendages in ways that help control motion. Not all animals follow the same plan, and not every body fits neatly into one pattern, but bilateral organization became deeply important in animal history. It is also one of the distant foundations beneath the human form. A human body has a front that faces the world, a back that supports posture, a head where many senses gather, a lower side that meets the ground, and left and right sides that balance movement. These features are modern in detail, but the deeper principle of directional animal organization reaches far back into early animal evolution. Long before a human walked, grasped, or turned the head toward a sound, animal bodies were learning how direction could matter. This connection should be held carefully. Early Cambrian animals were not early humans, and their bodies were not sketches of ours. Many were strange, small, marine, and unlike anything familiar. Some lineages vanished. Some left no direct path to later animals. But in the broad history of bodies, the organization of space was a threshold. Once a creature has a front, it can gather information there. Once it has a lower surface, it can interact more specifically with the ground or seafloor. Once it has balanced sides, movement can become more controlled. These changes make later features more understandable. Eyes near a front end, mouths placed where food is encountered, nerve cells arranged to coordinate movement, muscles organized to pull against the body's shape. None of these later features appears fully formed at once. They arise through many changes, many losses, and many inherited patterns. Still, direction gives the animal body a new relation to the world. It turns the environment from a surrounding condition into a path. The animal no longer merely receives the sea. It moves through gradients of food, oxygen, light, sediment, and risk. This matters for the title's mystery because bodies that move directionally are more likely to leave traces and more likely to be shaped by interaction. A trail across sediment is a record of direction. A burrow is a path through matter. A concentrated feeding end can change how a body meets food. A balanced body can make repeated movement more possible. In the Cambrian record, when such forms and traces become clearer, we are seeing not just more bodies, but bodies organized by space. The ancient ocean was becoming a world of fronts and backs, surfaces and paths, approaches and withdrawals. Before animal life could become visible as shells, tracks, and active forms, it had to learn that where a body faces, touches, and moves can shape its future. A moving body does not only need direction, it needs a way to take the outside world in, and a way to respond before the outside world destroys it. This is where mouths, guts, and nervous systems begin to matter. A mouth is not simply an opening. It is a controlled entrance into the body. Once food enters through a specific place, the body can begin to organize itself around intake, processing, and release. A gut is a deeper transformation. It creates an inner passage where the outside world is partly brought inside, broken down, sorted, and absorbed. This may sound ordinary because every human body depends on digestion so quietly that it is easy to forget. But in the history of animals, a through gut, with food entering and waste leaving in an ordered way, changed what a body could be. It allowed feeding to become more directional. It helped separate the front that meets food from the rear that releases what remains. It supported larger and more active bodies because nourishment could move through an internal system rather than remain limited to simple surfaces. Long before human meals, hunger, taste, or memory existed, animal bodies were solving the older problem of how to turn the world into energy without losing their own shape. The gut is one of the quiet bridges between environment and body. It tells us that animal life did not merely sit in the sea. It began to process the sea, the sediment, the microbial mats, and other organic matter through organized bodies. Alongside this, nervous systems began to offer another kind of order. A nerve is a way for one place in the body to affect another place quickly. Without such signaling, a larger body becomes difficult to coordinate. Cells can respond chemically, but a moving animal needs timing. If one part touches an obstacle, another part may need to adjust. If the front senses food, the body may need to move toward it. If the surface is damaged, muscles or tissues may need to contract. Early nervous systems were not minds in the human sense. They did not carry language, memory, grief, or imagination, but they gave bodies faster ways to link sensation and movement. A simple nerve net, a concentration of nerve cells, or a more organized signaling pathway could change how an animal lived. It could make movement less random, feeding more efficient, and escape more possible. The origin of the human nervous system lies unimaginably far beyond these beginnings, but it still depends on the same broad principle. Information from the world must be turned into action inside the body. When a sleeping person shifts slightly in the dark, breathes without thinking, or reacts to a sound before fully waking, the body is using a deeply inherited logic of sensing and response. The details are modern and human, but the foundation belongs to ancient animals that first made internal coordination more powerful. Senses also change the relationship between life and space. A body that detects light does not need to form an image as humans do. Even a simple sensitivity to brightness, shadow, or direction can matter. Light can reveal depth, time of day, exposure, or the approach of another body. Chemical sensing can help a creature respond to food, waste, danger, or a suitable surface. Touch can guide movement through mud or across a mat. These senses do not need consciousness to be useful. They only need to change survival. In a world where bodies were moving, feeding, hiding, and resisting contact, The ability to detect conditions became more valuable. A mouth could take in food, but sensing could help find it. A gut could process food, but movement could bring the body to better places. Nerves could coordinate movement, but senses could guide coordination towards something useful. These features supported one another, not as a planned design, but as linked consequences. The Cambrian record becomes striking because some animals show bodies that seem organized for this more active life. They have fronts, backs, surfaces, traces, feeding structures, protective parts, and evidence of motion. But the deeper story is not only the appearance of strange forms in stone, it is the gradual binding together of intake, digestion, sensation, and movement. A body with a mouth meets the world differently from a body without one. A body with a gut carries the outside through itself in a controlled path. A body with nerves can make one region answer another. A body with simple senses can respond to gradients rather than only endure them. For the distant origin of humans, these are not minor details. They are the earliest outlines of the animal condition that eventually made our own existence possible. We are bodies that eat, sense, move, react, and remember. The remembering came much later. The thinking came much later. The human face came much later. But the first animal solutions to feeding, internal passage, signaling, and response belong to the same deep history. The old question of why animals seem to appear so suddenly becomes quieter here. They appeared clearly only after many older systems had begun to fit together. A body had to have a direction. It had to bring energy inward. It had to coordinate cells across distance. It had to sense enough of the world to make movement matter. In that gathering of functions, the animal body became more than a shape. It became a moving conversation between inside and outside. The ability to see, eat, move, and react did not begin as a human gift. It began as an animal condition, deep in seas where no land creature breathed and no mind could name what was happening. A light-sensitive surface did not have to form a picture of the world to be useful. It only had to make brightness different from shadow, exposure different from shelter, open water different from covered ground. A mouth did not have to belong to a face. It only had to become a place where the outside could enter the body in an ordered way. A nerve did not have to carry thought. It only had to help one region of the body answer another before the chance for response was gone. These simple beginnings matter because they show how the animal body became tied to the world around it. Earlier life could change, survive, and reproduce without needing a body arranged for directed movement. But once animals moved through sediment and water, once they fed through openings, once they sensed conditions ahead, the relationship between life and environment became more immediate. The world was no longer only a surrounding sea. It became a field of signals, surfaces, food, danger, and direction. The human body still lives inside that inheritance. Eyes gather light at the front of the head. The mouth opens where the body first meets food. The gut carries matter through an inner passage. Nerves connect skin, muscle, organs, and brain in continuous communication. These details are human in their present form, shaped by a later and very different evolutionary history. Yet their deepest logic is much older. We are animals before we are thinkers. We are bodies before we are memories. Every quiet breath, every swallow, every shift of posture in sleep depends on ancient solutions to movement, energy, and response. The early animal world did not contain human eyes or human thoughts, but it contained the beginnings of a life organized around sensing and acting. That is why Cambrian fossils can feel so powerful when viewed from far away in time. They show bodies that seem to have entered a more active conversation with their surroundings. Some had protective surfaces. Some moved across or through sediment. Some fed in ways that left marks. Some carried signs of direction, front and back, upper and lower, inside and outside. Each of these features changed the possible future of animal life. A body that can sense light may respond to shadow. A body that can move may leave a poor place and reach a better one. A body with a gut can process food more efficiently. A body with internal signaling can coordinate its own tissues. None of these features alone explains the rise of animals, but together they help explain why animal forms became more varied, more active, and more likely to be preserved. They also help correct the feeling that animals appeared from nowhere. What appears suddenly in stone often rests on older layers of biological preparation. The animal condition was not invented in one moment. It gathered slowly around problems that every moving body must solve. Where is food? Where is harm? Where is the surface? Where is the direction of movement? How can energy be taken in without losing the body's order? How can one cell, one tissue, one side, one ache respond in time with the rest? These questions were not asked by ancient animals, because questions require minds, but their bodies answered through survival, generation after generation. Some answers failed and vanished. Some became rare fossils. Some became foundations so successful that later life kept building upon them. The human listener, resting now in a world of walls, language, and memory, is still held by those foundations. The body's front faces outward. The senses open into darkness. The gut continues its quiet work. The nervous system keeps the organism joined to itself. Behind all of this lies a history older than land forests, older than bones on shore, older than the first human ancestor by an almost impossible distance. The Cambrian seas were not the beginning of us, but they reveal something essential about the kind of life that eventually made us possible. They show that animal existence began to take shape when bodies could carry the outside inward, send signals across themselves, move through uneven space, and leave behind marks that stone could remember. The word explosion can mislead the mind. It makes us imagine a single instant, a sudden flash, a world empty in the morning and crowded by evening. But geology uses time differently from human life. What seems abrupt in the history of Earth may still cover millions of years. 1,000,000 years is longer than every city, every written language, every human memory, and every ancestor whose face could be imagined. It is enough time for coastlines to shift, seas to rise and fall, populations to divide, lineages to vanish, and small inherited differences to become large. So when people speak of the Cambrian Explosion, the word does not mean that animals appeared in one moment. It means that, compared with the enormous stretch of time before it, many animal forms became visible in the fossil record within a relatively narrow geological interval. The shock comes from scale. After billions of years in which life was mostly microbial, soft, faint, or difficult to classify, the rock record begins to show bodies with a clarity that feels sudden to us. Yet sudden to stone is not sudden to a living creature. No animal living then experienced an explosion of all animals. Each organism lived in its own local water, on its own seafloor, within its own population, under its own limits of oxygen, food, sediment, and risk. The change that seems dramatic from far away would have been spread across generations beyond counting. This difference between human time and Earth time is essential for the central question. If we hear that nothing evolved for 3 billion years and then every animal appeared at once, the mind wants a single event. It wants a trigger, a cause, a turning point. But the record asks for more patience. Evolution works through births, deaths, variations, and environments, not through one universal command. A population may change slowly enough that no single generation looks transformed, while the fossil record, with its missing pages, later makes the result appear sharp. Many of the steps toward animal bodies may have occurred before they became easy to fossilize. Soft tissues, small forms, early developmental changes, and ecological interactions could have existed without leaving durable evidence. Then, when harder parts, burrows, and clearer body plans became more common, the rocks began to preserve what had previously remained faint. The result is a pattern that looks compressed. It is not false to call it rapid, but rapid must be measured by the right clock. A reef, a mudflat, or a shallow sea could pass through countless ordinary days while lineages slowly changed around it. The drama belongs mostly to the observer who arrives hundreds of millions of years later and sees scattered pages bound into one thin chapter. For the distant origin of humans, this teaches an important lesson about time. Human beings often understand change through lifetimes. A child grows, a parent ages, a memory forms, a house decays, a language shifts. Even the rise and fall of civilizations feels long to us. But animal evolution unfolded on a scale where 1,000 human histories would still be brief. The body that listens now, with eyes, nerves, gut, muscles and breath, is the result of changes accumulated through intervals no human mind can naturally feel. Our senses are built for nights, seasons, hunger, danger and companionship, not for geological time. That is why the Cambrian can feel like a paradox. It compresses immense change into a phrase short enough to fit in a title. The phrase is useful because it awakens the question, but it must not become the answer. The animals did not arrive all at once in the ordinary meaning of those words. They became visible, varied, and geologically memorable over a span that was brief only when measured against the age of Earth. In that difference between human time and stone time, the mystery becomes quieter, deeper, and more honest. The fossil record is not a continuous film. It is more like a ruined archive, with some pages preserved, some pages damaged, and many pages missing completely. This matters because a gradual change in life can look sudden when the evidence is broken. If we had every generation of every ancient organism arranged in perfect order, the rise of animal bodies might appear less like a sharp event and more like a long series of small transitions. But Earth does not preserve life that way. It saves fragments. A shell here, a trace there, an impression in fine sediment, a body buried under rare conditions, a chemical signal, a disturbed layer of mud. Between these signs can lie huge intervals with little or no evidence. When later observers connect the surviving pieces, the pattern may look like a leap. The leap may be partly real because animal life did become more diverse and visible during the early Cambrian, but the appearance of a leap is strengthened by absence. Missing evidence can compress time. It can make slow preparation look like sudden arrival. This is one of the most important corrections to the title's mystery. The ancient world was not required to leave a full record for us. Most of its living bodies were soft, small, local, and temporary. Many lived in places where preservation was unlikely. Many were destroyed by decay, currents, scavenging, chemical change, burial too shallow, burial too deep, or later geological pressure. Whole environments could disappear from the record. Seafloors could be subducted, folded, heated, or eroded. Rocks that might have held delicate evidence may simply no longer exist. So when the Cambrian record shows many recognizable animals after a long, quieter interval, we are seeing both biological history and the uneven survival of evidence. The stones do not lie, but they also do not speak completely. They tell us what passed through the narrow gate of preservation. Everything else must be approached with caution. This helps explain why the pre-Cambrian world can feel so empty even when it was not. A soft organism with no hard shell might live across many generations and still leave almost nothing. A small early animal might die and decay before sediment could hold its shape. A body that moved gently across a microbial mat might leave a trace too faint to survive deep time. Even if early animals or animal relatives existed before their clearest fossils, their evidence could be rare, ambiguous, or lost. This does not mean we can invent missing creatures freely. Scientific honesty does not allow us to fill every gap with imagination. But it does mean we should avoid turning gaps into certainty. The absence of a fossil is not always proof that a form did not exist. It may only mean that the form did not fossilize, or that the rock containing it has not been found, or that its trace is too unclear to interpret confidently. For the distant origin of humans, this is a humbling lesson. Much later in evolution, human ancestors would leave bones, teeth, footprints, tools, cut marks, and fire-altered sediments. Even then, the record is incomplete. Entire populations can be known from a handful of bones. Whole ways of life can remain uncertain because soft tissues, voices, gestures, and memories disappear. If this is true for the recent human past, it is even more true for the deep animal past. The earliest foundations of our body passed through ages when almost everything living was fragile before stone. Eyes, guts, nerves, muscles, and tissues have histories deeper than their most obvious fossils. The first steps toward these features may have been preserved poorly, or not at all. The fossil record gives us real evidence, but it is evidence shaped by survival after death. This is why Cambrian suddenness should be heard with two meanings at once. It reflects a real increase in visible animal forms, activity, and preservation. It also reflects the fact that earlier evidence is fainter, rarer, and harder to read. A broken archive can make a long story appear short. A missing middle can make two surviving pages look as if they touch. The Cambrian rocks are powerful because they contain many clearer pages at once, but they do not erase the hidden pages before them. The question is not simply why animals appeared suddenly. It is why the conditions of life, body, behavior, and preservation finally aligned well enough for animals to become visible in the archive of Earth. The phrase "every animal appeared at once" is powerful because it captures the feeling of looking at the Cambrian record from a great distance. Before it, the evidence is often quiet, soft, difficult, and scattered. Then, in a comparatively narrow interval of geological time, many animal forms become clearer. But the phrase must be corrected gently if we want the story to remain true. Every animal did not appear at once. The animals of today did not suddenly fill the ancient sea. There were no mammals, no birds, no flowering forests, no human ancestors walking along a shore. What appeared more clearly were many early animal groups, many body plans, and many traces of animals living in ways that stone could preserve. The event is still extraordinary, but not because it was instantaneous. It is extraordinary because a long-hidden animal history became visible with unusual force. The Cambrian record shows a world where bodies had become more organized, more active, and more likely to leave durable evidence. Some animals had harder parts. Some moved across or through sediment. Some fed in ways that disturbed surfaces. Some carried forms that suggest direction, protection, and interaction. This is enough to make the ancient world feel suddenly crowded. Yet behind that crowd were older foundations: microbial life, changing oxygen, cellular cooperation, soft pre-Cambrian organisms, and long experiments in being a body. The more careful version of the title would be slower and less dramatic, but more accurate. For a very long time, life evolved mostly in ways that were microscopic, soft, chemical, or difficult to preserve. Then, during the early Cambrian, many animal forms became visible in the fossil record over a short interval by geological standards. That statement does not destroy the wonder. It protects it. It allows the mystery to remain large without becoming false. The word "appeared" can mean two different things. It can mean something began to exist. It can also mean something became visible to us. In deep time, these meanings are often confused. A lineage may exist before its first known fossil. A soft body may live before it leaves a clear trace. A biological change may begin before geology preserves it. When animals appear in the record, we are seeing the first strong evidence, not necessarily the first breath of that lineage. This matters for the origin of humans because our own ancestry is also known through incomplete evidence. A fossil skull does not mark the beginning of all human traits. A footprint does not mark the beginning of walking. A stone tool does not mark the beginning of thought. Each is a preserved sign of something already unfolding. The same caution applies far deeper in time. A Cambrian fossil may mark the visibility of an animal body, while its roots extend into earlier life that left fewer signs. This is why the suddenness should be understood as both real and limited. Real because the early Cambrian record does show a striking increase in recognizable animal diversity, body structures, and traces of activity. Limited because the roots of those animals did not begin from nothing in that moment, and because many later animal groups had not yet appeared. Evolution did not leap directly from invisible microbes to the full modern animal world. It moved through thresholds, some preserved and some lost. The Cambrian was one of the great preserved thresholds. It was a time when bodies, behaviors, and geological memory overlapped strongly enough to change what the rock record could show. This also changes how we hear the long silence before it. That silence was not the absence of evolution. It was the absence of familiar evidence. Life was changing in cells, in metabolism, in environments, in soft forms, and in relationships too delicate to survive easily. The Cambrian did not break a dead stillness. It made an older movement visible. If the title asks why nothing evolved for so long, the answer must begin by refusing the premise. Something was always evolving, but for most of that immense history, evolution did not produce many hard, active, easily fossilized bodies. If the title asks why every animal appeared at once, The answer must also be careful. They did not all appear at once. Many animal forms became visible across a geologically brief interval after hidden foundations had accumulated for ages. The true mystery is not a sudden miracle. It is the slow crossing from invisible preparation into visible form, from life that stone barely remembers to bodies that could finally leave a lasting outline in the earth. Not every body that appears in the ancient record becomes an ancestor. This is one of the coldest truths in the history of life. When we look back at the Cambrian seas, it is tempting to search for beginnings that lead toward the present. The first hints of later animals, the roots of familiar groups, the distant foundations of the human body. Some of those roots are real, but they are only part of the scene. The early animal world was not a straight road aimed at today. It was a wide field of experiments, many of them lost. Some forms survived through descendants that changed across immense time. Others disappeared completely. Some left fossils that seem strange because they do not fit cleanly into the living categories we know. Their bodies may show combinations of features that feel unfamiliar. Armor without a familiar outline, limbs arranged in unexpected ways, feeding structures unlike modern mouths, surfaces and spines that belong to vanished ways of life. These creatures were not failures while they lived. They were living answers to the conditions around them, but evolution does not preserve every answer. A body can work for a time and still leave no future. A lineage can flourish in one sea, under one climate, with one set of ecological relationships, and later vanish when conditions change. The Cambrian record is powerful partly because it shows variety, but variety is not the same as destiny. Many forms were branches, not trunks. Some were side paths that ended before they could connect to the long histories leading into later animals. This matters because the human mind often arranges evolution like a ladder. At the bottom, simple life. Higher up, complex animals. At the top, ourselves. That picture is comforting, but it is wrong. The history of life is not a climb toward humans. It is a branching process shaped by survival, extinction, environment, and chance. The human body is not the purpose of the Cambrian. It is a late descendant of one surviving region of a much larger animal tree. For every line that continued, many others were cut away. Some vanished so completely that we know them only through a few preserved shapes. Others may have vanished without fossils at all. The visible record is therefore not only a record of origins. It is also a record of loss. Every strange fossil carries two meanings at once. It shows that life found a form that could exist, and it reminds us that existence alone does not guarantee continuation. The early animal seas were full of pressures that could favor one body today and punish it tomorrow. A shell might protect against one kind of danger, but become costly if food changed or movement became more important. A specialized feeding structure might work well in one habitat, then become useless if that habitat disappeared. A body suited to a particular sea floor might struggle when sediments shifted, oxygen changed, or other organisms altered the environment. There is no permanent victory in evolution. There is only survival under conditions that do not stay still. This is why extinct Cambrian forms should not be treated as failed attempts to become modern animals. They were complete organisms in their own time, shaped by their own worlds. They did not exist as rough drafts of later life. Their value is not only in whether they gave rise to descendants, their value is also in showing how many ways animal life could be arranged. For the deep origin of humans, this is a humbling thought. Our bodies contain ancient animal principles: direction, tissues, feeding, sensing, movement, and cellular cooperation. But those principles pass through a history filled with vanished alternatives. The path that eventually led to vertebrates, mammals, primates, and humans was never the only possible path. It was one thread that remained unbroken while many others ended. If any early condition had shifted differently, if certain populations had disappeared, if certain environments had not persisted, the later animal world might have looked very different. This does not mean we should invent alternate histories as fact. It simply reminds us that survival is not proof of superiority in every sense. It is proof that a lineage passed through enough filters to leave descendants. The Cambrian animals that vanished also passed through earlier filters. They were real. They lived, fed, moved, defended themselves, reproduced and interacted with their surroundings. Then, at some point, their lines ended. The stones keep a few of them, but not their sensations, not their full colours, not their ordinary days, and not the complete ecosystems around them. When we ask why animal life seemed to appear so suddenly, we should also ask how much of that first visible diversity was later lost. The explosion was not only a birth of possibilities, it was the beginning of a long sorting, where some forms continued and many others fell silent. The ancient sea did not produce one future. It produced many, and most did not reach us. Some branches of animal life continue so quietly that we forget they are branches at all. Others vanish so completely that they feel almost unreal when they are found again in stone. The Cambrian record contains both kinds of evidence. There are forms that seem to belong near the roots of later animal groups, though their exact placement may be debated. There are also forms that appear to have no clear living equivalent. They stand in the record like closed doors. A strange body may show armour, limbs, spines, plates, or feeding structures, but still resist an easy answer to the question of where it belongs. This is not because ancient life was confused. It is because modern categories were built from survivors. We name life by what made it through. We compare fossils to the living world because the living world is what remains. But many Cambrian animals belong to branches that ended before they could become part of that living reference. Their strangeness is partly the strangeness loss. If more branches had survived, their bodies might feel less strange to us. They might have become ordinary members of the animal world. Instead, they appear as rare designs from a sea whose full variety has been cut down by time. This loss changes how we should hear the phrase, "every animal appeared." The Cambrian was not only an opening, it was also the beginning of an immense narrowing. Many possibilities entered the visible record, but only some continued. A body plan can arise, spread, and disappear. A lineage can be common in one interval and absent in another. A form can be well suited to one environment and poorly suited to the next. Even the features that seem powerful can become burdens under changed conditions. Armor can protect, but it can also make movement expensive. Specialization can improve feeding, but it can also trap a lineage if the food source changes. A body built for one kind of seafloor may not thrive when sediments, currents, oxygen, or neighboring organisms change. Extinction is not only a catastrophe from the sky, it can also be the slow closing of a way of life. For the origin of humans, this is a necessary correction. We tend to imagine our ancestry by following the line that survived, moving backward from people to primates, mammals, vertebrates, early chordates, and older animal forms. That line matters because it eventually leads to us. But it is only visible as a line because all the other branches around it have been pruned away or remain separate. The ancestors of humans did not walk through deep time alone. Their distant animal relatives shared ancient seas with many organisms that were not on the path to us. Some of those organisms may have been more numerous, more armoured, more visually impressive, or more successful for a time, yet their descendants did not continue into the present, or they continued in forms far removed from those early shapes. The human body, therefore, stands not at the top of an inevitable staircase, but at the end of one surviving route through a landscape of vanished alternatives. This does not reduce the value of human life. It makes it more fragile and more truthful. To exist at all is to inherit an unbroken chain through a history where most chains broke. Fossils of vanished Cambrian animals remind us that life's creativity is not the same as permanence. A strange animal preserved in shale may represent a whole way of living that no longer exists. Its feeding method may have disappeared. Its movement may have no modern counterpart. Its body may have solved problems that later environments no longer asked. We can study its form, compare its structures, and place it cautiously among known groups when evidence allows. But we should not pretend to recover everything. The fossil gives a body without its full world. It gives shape without ordinary behavior, preservation without breath, evidence without the countless moments that made up the organism's life. This is why extinct branches carry a special quietness. They tell us that the early animal world was not merely preparing modern life, it was alive in its own right. The Cambrian seas were not a workshop designed to make today's animals. They were ecosystems filled with temporary success. Some lines became part of later history. Others ended after leaving only mineral shadows. Still others may have ended without leaving any shadow at all. When we think of animal origins, we must hold both survival and disappearance together. The bodies that led toward humans matter, but so do the bodies that did not. They reveal how wide the early animal experiment may have been, and how narrow the surviving result appears from the present. The question is not only why animals became visible, it is also why so many visible forms did not remain. In that lost variety, the Cambrian record becomes more than an origin story. It becomes a reminder that evolution is filled with lives that were complete in their own time, even when they left no future beyond stone. To understand animal history honestly, we have to let go of the straight line. Life did not move from simple beginnings toward humans as if following a hidden road. It branched, spread, narrowed, failed, survived, and branched again. The Cambrian seas make this especially clear because they show many bodies that do not sit comfortably inside a simple ladder of progress. Some animals from that time help us understand the deeper roots of later groups. Others look like experiments whose future was cut short. Some may belong near lineages that continued, but in forms so different from modern descendants that their place remains difficult to explain with certainty. Others appear almost isolated, as if they were solutions to problems that no longer exist. This does not mean they were mistakes. A living organism is not a failed version of something later. It is a complete life in its own setting, shaped by the water, sediment, chemistry, food, danger, and neighbours around it. The fact that a lineage disappears does not make its living moment less real. It only means its chain did not continue through the later filters of Earth. This is where the Cambrian story becomes colder and more useful. It tells us that the rise of animal bodies was also the rise of animal loss. As soon as many new forms became possible, many ways of being alive also became vulnerable to ending. A body plan could spread for a time and then vanish. A feeding method could work in one world and fail in another. A protective surface could become costly. A specialized shape could become trapped by the very success that once supported it. Evolution does not protect complexity because it is complex. It does not preserve beauty because it is strange. It does not reward a body for being interesting to future minds. It only passes forward what survives and reproduces under conditions that keep changing. The human body exists because one line of inheritance remained unbroken through this long sorting, but that line was never alone. Around it were countless relatives, competitors, neighbours, and vanished alternatives. The deep animal past was not a hallway leading toward us. It was more like a dark, branching reef, with many channels growing outward, some joining larger structures, many ending in silence. For the origin of humans, this changes the emotional shape of the story. We can still recognize ancient foundations inside ourselves, cells cooperating, tissues forming surfaces, bodies holding direction, mouths taking in energy, nerves carrying signals, senses connecting inside and outside. But those foundations did not belong only to the line that eventually led to human beings. They were part of a broader animal world, tested in many forms. Some forms continued toward vertebrates, mammals, primates, and people. Others continued into animal groups still alive today. Many disappeared before land, animals, forests, or human ancestors existed. If we only follow the surviving line, we may mistake survival for inevitability. We may imagine that the past was always aiming at the present. The fossils do not support that comfort. They show that the present is what remains after enormous loss. This is not a reason for despair. It is a reason for accuracy. The history of life is valuable not because it guarantees us, but because it reveals how unlikely any living continuity is. Every organism alive now stands at the end of a lineage that passed through ancient oceans, changing climates, extinctions, accidents, and narrow chances. Every human listener carries in the body an inheritance that survived while most possible inheritances did not. The Cambrian record is one early window into that truth. It shows creativity without certainty, variety without promise, and beginnings mixed with endings. Some animals became part of the long future. Some became only impressions in rock. Some may have left no trace at all. The missing ones matter too, because they remind us that the fossil record is not a parade of winners. It is a damaged memory of a much wider living world. When we ask why animals seem to appear so suddenly, we should also ask what happened after they appeared. The answer is not a clean march upward. It is a sorting across deep time. Bodies arose, changed, multiplied, and disappeared. The world did not keep every branch. It kept enough for life to continue, and from one late branch came the human body that can now look back and wonder about the silence behind it. Human beings did not appear in the Cambrian seas. No human ancestor walked there, no hand touched the mud, no eye looked up from land, and no mind wandered about time. The world of early animals was entirely older than the world that would one day hold mammals, primates, language, tools, memory, and sleep beside a quiet room. Yet the story still belongs to us in a deep biological sense, because the human body is an animal body. It carries arrangements that began long before anything human existed. It has a front that faces the world, a back that supports it, left and right sides that help balance movement, an inner passage for food, tissues that specialize, cells that cooperate, nerves that carry signals, and senses that open the body to its surroundings. These features did not appear in their human form during the Cambrian. They passed through immense changes afterward. But some of their oldest foundations became visible in that early animal world, when bodies began to show direction, feeding, movement, protection, and traces in stone. This is why the question in the title reaches all the way to the listener. It is not only a question about fossils. It is a question about why the kind of body that eventually made human awareness possible took so long to become visible. To answer that honestly, we have to hold two truths together. First, life was evolving long before animals became clear in the rocks. It was changing through cells, chemistry, energy use, oxygen, cooperation, and soft forms that did not always survive as fossils. Second, when animal bodies became more visible, something important really had changed. The world had reached a point where bodies could be larger, more organized, more active, and more preservable. The Cambrian record is not a magic beginning, but it is a major brightening in the record of animal life. For humans, this brightening matters because we are not outside the animal story. The quiet work of the gut, the constant need for oxygen, the coordination of muscles, the signals moving through nerves, the healing of skin, and the sleep of the brain all belong to an inheritance older than humanity by an almost unimaginable distance. A person may feel separate from ancient seas because human life is filled with names, places, families, tools, and memories. But beneath that personal world is a body made from older solutions. Breathing depends on oxygen chemistry shaped long before land animals. Digestion depends on an internal passage that belongs to the animal way of life. Sensing depends on the deep principle that the outside world can be turned into signals inside the body. Movement depends on tissues that coordinate force. Even rest depends on the body maintaining order while the mind loosens its grip on the day. None of this means early animals were trying to become us. They were not. They lived in their own environments, under their own pressures, as complete organisms of their time. The human lineage is only one late surviving thread among many. But when that thread is followed backward far enough, it does not end at the first tool, the first upright walker, or the first mammal. It passes through older vertebrates, older chordate-like forms, older animals, and finally into the shared cellular foundations of life itself. The Cambrian stands along that backward path not as a birthplace of humans, but as a window into the moment when animal bodies became easier for Earth to remember. This gives the title a quieter meaning. The long delay before visible animals was not a delay in a plan to make people. It was the time required for many hidden conditions to gather. Cells that could cooperate, energy systems that could support activity, oxygen that could help power larger bodies, developmental patterns that could build forms again, and environments where bodies could interact strongly enough to leave evidence. When these conditions overlapped, the fossil record changed. It began to show animals not as vague possibilities, but as shapes, traces, surfaces, and paths. Much later, after countless extinctions and transformations, one branch of animal life would carry forward the foundations from which human bodies arose. That is why the Cambrian is both remote and intimate. It is remote because nothing there looked like a person. It is intimate because the basic problem of being an animal was already taking form. How to hold a body together, how to take energy in, how to sense the world, how to move, how to survive contact with other lives, and how to leave descendants in a changing sea. The human body is a late answer to those ancient problems. Not the intended answer, not the final answer, but one fragile continuation. The human body is filled with ordinary acts that are much older than humanity. Seeing, swallowing, breathing, sensing pressure, turning towards sound, healing a wound, resting in darkness, and waking again all feel close and personal, yet each rests on a deep animal inheritance. A person does not need to think about digestion for the gut to continue its work. A person does not need to command every breath for oxygen to enter the blood. A person does not need to consciously direct each cell for the body to repair itself. This quiet automation can make the body feel natural, almost simple. But it is not simple. It is the outcome of ancient biological arrangements layered through time. The Cambrian seas did not contain human organs, but they help reveal the early animal logic beneath many organs. An inside separated from an outside, a front that meets the world, tissues that specialize, signals that coordinate response, and feeding systems that draw energy from the environment without dissolving the organism's order. These principles are not dramatic in a modern room at night. They are quiet, constant, and easily forgotten, yet they are exactly the kind of ancient solutions that made later animals possible. The eye is one example, though it must be handled carefully. Human eyes are highly complex and came from a long evolutionary history after the earliest animals. They did not appear suddenly in their modern form, but the deeper principle of light sensitivity reaches far back. Even a simple ability to detect light and shadow can change how a body responds to its surroundings. In an ancient sea, light could mark depth, exposure, time, movement, or shelter. A body that could respond to such differences did not need thought. It only needed a biological pathway through which outside conditions changed internal action. Much later, in the human body, vision became tied to memory, attention, recognition, fear, beauty, reading, and dreams. But beneath all that human richness lies a more basic animal fact. The outside world can enter the body as information. The same is true of touch, chemical sensing, balance, and sound in later lineages. Senses make the body permeable without making it helpless. They allow a living organism to be affected by the world in controlled ways. Digestion carries a similar depth. The human gut is not only a place where food is broken down, it is an ancient kind of border, a passage where the outside becomes partly internal. Food enters the mouth as matter from the world, moves through a protected channel, and is transformed into energy, growth, repair, and heat. This ordinary act rests on the animal solution of controlled intake. A body cannot simply open itself to everything. It must admit, sort, absorb, and reject. The earliest animal feeding systems were not human digestion, and they should not be imagined as such. But they belong to the long history of bodies learning to take energy inward while keeping themselves intact. Without that principle, no later brain could think, no muscles could move, and no sleeping body could maintain its quiet rhythms through the night. Nerves add another layer. Human nerves allow sensation, movement, reflexes, pain, coordination, and thought. But the ancient animal problem was simpler and deeper. One region of the body needed to affect another in time. A larger body cannot rely only on slow local reactions. It needs connection. If the surface meets danger, the body must respond. If food appears near the front, movement may need to change. If tissues contract, they must do so in a pattern rather than chaos. Early nervous systems were not minds, but they were steps toward internal unity. They allowed animal bodies to become more coordinated, and coordination made new ways of living possible. The human brain, with its memories and questions, is a late and delicate flowering of this older need for connection. It is not separate from animal history, it is built upon it. This is the educational value hidden inside the ancient question. The story of early animals is not only a story about strange fossils. It is a way to understand the body as a history, rather than a possession. The body is not merely something a person has. It is something life has been shaping for billions of years through limits, losses, accidents, and survivals. The Cambrian record matters because it shows an early visible stage in that shaping, when animal bodies began to leave clearer signs of direction, feeding, defense, motion, and response. Much later, these ancient themes would be rewritten through vertebrates, land animals, mammals, primates, and human beings. But the old questions remain inside us in quiet form. How does a body take energy from the world? How does it protect its inside? How does it sense change? How does it move without falling apart? How does it preserve itself long enough to pass life forward? These were not human questions at first. They were animal problems, and the body listening now is one late answer still breathing through the night. When the story is followed to its quiet edge, the old title becomes less like a claim and more like a doorway. For 3 billion years, life did not do nothing. It changed the planet slowly, invisibly, and often without leaving bodies that later eyes could recognize. Microbes altered chemistry. Cells learned boundaries, energy use, repair, and inheritance. Oxygen rose unevenly through oceans and air. Cells found ways to cooperate. Soft organisms appeared before the Cambrian, leaving strange impressions that do not fit easily into modern categories. Then, in a relatively brief interval by geological standards, animal bodies became clearer in stone. They did not all appear in one instant. They did not arrive as the modern animal world, but they became visible in a way that still feels startling. Shells, traces, movement, feeding, direction, protection, and the first strong signs of bodies living through contact with other bodies. The true wonder is not that life suddenly began after emptiness. The wonder is that so much preparation could remain hidden for so long, and then become readable only when biology and geology happened to meet in the right way. This is a gentler answer, but it is also a stronger one. It does not need false shock. It does not need to pretend the earth was dead until animals arrived. It asks us to respect slow foundations. A body can only appear after many older conditions have been gathered. A shell depends on cells that can build it. Movement depends on energy and coordination. Sensing depends on signals. Feeding depends on boundaries between inside and outside. A fossil depends on death meeting sediment under rare conditions. The Cambrian record looks bright because many of these conditions overlapped, but behind that brightness was a vast darkness of preparation, not a darkness of absence. For the human listener, this may be the most useful lesson in the story. We often value what appears suddenly, a visible result, a clear shape, a finished body, a decisive moment. But the history of life suggests that the deepest changes often happen before they can be seen. The roots of an animal body were laid in chemistry too small for the eye. The roots of human breath were laid before lungs. The roots of memory were laid before brains, in the older ability of life to preserve information across generations. The roots of movement, sensing, digestion, and sleep reach backward into seas where no creature knew it was part of a future. Nothing in that ancient world was aiming at us, yet we are made from what survived it. Every person carries a body that is both present and ancient. The skin marks a boundary older in principle than any culture. The gut turns the world into energy through an animal inheritance far older than language. The nervous system keeps the body connected to itself, even in rest. The breath depends on a planetary transformation begun by life that had no lungs. The eyes close at night, but the biological history beneath them does not close. It continues quietly in cells, tissues, signals, and repair. This does not make humans the purpose of evolution. It makes human life a continuation of a much larger story, one filled with loss as much as survival. Many early animal forms vanished. Many branches ended without descendants. Many soft bodies left no record at all. The path that reached us was not guaranteed. It was one fragile thread among many, passing through ancient seas, changing environments, extinctions, and countless generations that knew nothing of the future. To understand this is to become more careful with wonder. The Cambrian was not a magical instant when every animal appeared from nowhere. It was a threshold where hidden biological capacities became visible enough for Earth to remember them. The stones began to hold bodies, but life had been working long before the stones could speak clearly. That is the message worth carrying from this ancient question. What looks sudden may have been prepared in silence. What looks empty may have been full of work too small to see. What looks like a beginning may be the first clear evidence of a story already old. And if the human body itself is built from such hidden histories, then perhaps the deepest origins of who we are do not begin with thought or tools or civilization, but with the patient living matter that learned, long before us, how to remain together, respond to the world, and continue. When we look back across the 3 billion quiet years before animals became visible, are we seeing a pause in evolution, or are we only seeing the limits of what stone, time, and the human mind are able to remember?